Cairo's museums are full of glass and silence, but silence does not mean stillness. Beneath those floodlit corridors, the old kingdoms still breathe, through paint that flakes like scabs, through limestone faces that refuse to close their eyes. Tonight, on Somnolent Conspiracies, we descend not into the desert but into the ledgers of the living. The case began when a sarcophagus, newly unearthed on the west bank of the Nile, was delivered into Zurich's Antiquities Institute for study. Its lid bore the usual motifs: ankh, lotus, jackal, but nothing in the hieroglyphic register suggested the impossible. The crate was weighed on arrival, 312 kilograms. Weeks later, after a string of deaths in the city, it was weighed again, 319. No one had tampered with the seals. No one had opened the lid. Yet each time a citizen of Zurich died, by heart attack, by accident, by bullet, the scale ticked higher, precise to the gram. Police dismissed it as calibration error until the increments matched the exact mass of the deceased. Every obituary became a tally, every funeral a notch. The coffin was adding bodies it never touched. Now an investigator must trace not only the crate's provenance, but also the strange rhythm between civic mortality and ancient wood. Was this artifact a reliquary designed to consume souls? A fraud arranged to inflate value? Or a crime committed in the present, disguised as superstition? We will examine registers, weighings, and the city's own shadow economy of death. We will test whether coincidence can be so precise, and what it means when an object measures us without permission. Stay with me. The lid is shut. The balance is waiting. And somewhere Anubis is keeping score. The Antiquities Institute in Zurich smells faintly of dust and lemon oil, the kind of sterile elegance that makes secrets feel domesticated. Detective Jonas Meyer signed his name in the visitor log, tucked his gloves into his coat pocket, and followed the echo of his shoes toward the Egyptian gallery. He had been pulled from a homicide scene once because a donor found a spider in a vitrine. Museums knew how to dial the police for everything. Today, the call came from a curator with a voice that didn't tremble on the phone but carried a bridle of urgency. Asterisk, come now, please. Don't bring press. Asterisk. Dr. Helena Strauss waited for him beneath a suspended papyrus boat. Her hair wound into a knot so precise it looked measured. She was the sort of academic who dressed like a verdict. Black suit, white blouse, a silver ankh at the throat. Detective, she said, offering a hand he didn't take because he was already looking through the glass at the sarcophagus. The coffin lay like a felled tree under museum lights, cedar darkened by bitumen, glyphs crawling in ordered lines. Jackal, lotus, offering hands. Time had smoothed the wood into something nearly skin-like. Jonas had seen bodies on slabs. This wasn't far. We logged it in at 312 kilograms on arrival, Helena said. Custom scale. Independent reading by our conservator as well. Jonas glanced at the clipboard she held. The numbers were written without drama. 312.00 kg. The date stamp matched the day the crate had come off the plane from Cairo. Then this morning, she said, after the Malen case. What Malen case? Local man, she said. You all would have it already, I thought. Heart failure. His name was Dieter Lutz. She tapped the second line on the clipboard.
Stern 384.00 kg Stern.
Weighed again at 946. 72 kilograms more. 72, Jonas repeated, as if the syllables themselves needed inspection. He could feel how the number wanted to anchor itself to something familiar. A man's weight. You're sure it's not a scale? We checked the scale with calibration weights. Zeros. We moved the platform. We changed the power supply. The conservator swore on his pension. She tried to hand him a second clipboard, the one with the conservator's signature and serial numbers for test weights. And then the guard said something stupid. Jonas finally looked at her. What did the guard say? He said, "It feeds." The words sat between them like a draft of cold air. I've sent him home. Jonas approached the glass case. The sarcophagus lid was carved with the usual narrative. The deceased offered to gods, the lector-priest, the balance, the heart. The jackal-headed figure of Anubis watched without eyes. Jonas caught his reflection in the glass, short dark hair, the pallor of a man who lived indoors, a mouth that defaulted to skeptical. He looked down at the base of the case. Museum-grade stainless. Nothing that suggested a trick. You said customs weighed it at the airport, he said. I want those logs, and I want a new weighing not with your equipment. Certified industrial scale. Today. Helena nodded. We've already booked a freight scale in the basement, used for sculpture deliveries. It's traceable to national standards. Traceable to standards. Jonas liked the phrase. Good. I'll observe. They moved through a corridor of gods and farmers to a freight elevator that sighed them down. In the conservation bay, the sarcophagus had already been craned onto a steel pallet with straps across its length. 2 technicians stood ready at the digital scale, the kind that could weigh a car and tell you if it had swallowed a wrench. Before we do it, Jonas said, run the test weights. All of them. The technicians complied with the calm choreography of people who had been told a case might eat lives for breakfast. 20 kilograms, then 50, then 100 stamped plates with their own genealogies. The numbers walked onto the display and stood exactly where they were supposed to. Jonas watched like a man reading a lie detector. Now the pallet, he said. The crane motor hummed. The coffin descended onto the scale with the slow conviction of a verdict. The display numbers fluttered, settled, nudged again, as if the machine were clearing its throat.
Stern 384.00 kg Stern.
Helena's breath left her. Jonas felt his own heartbeat click into a new rhythm. The conservator wrote the number in block letters, then circled it as if that could make it behave. Let me see the death record for Lutz, Jonas said, not looking away from the digits. Helena handed him a printout she had already pulled from the registrar's public portal. Jonas understood this kind of prepared cooperation. Curators learned to anticipate police. The certificate listed age 56, weight obtained at autopsy pre-cremation. 71.6 kg. Close enough to be a drumbeat. Close enough to be a superstition's grin. He kept his voice practical. Who knew you were weighing it today? Just us, Helena said. And security logs will show who accessed this floor. We are not idiots, detective. If someone is gaming the system, they'd need a crane, a forklift, and a magician who can turn physics off. Jonas checked the pallet straps, the edges of the coffin where lid met box. He pressed his knuckles lightly against the wood. It was cool, the cool of a church floor. He felt nothing but the dead patience of long fibers. Where was the coffin before this morning? He asked. In Gallery 2 under glass, Helena said. Motion sensors, cameras. You can have the footage. We already scrubbed it. No one touches it. No one even sneezes near it. And yesterday? Same. Jonas took a slow breath. Homicide taught him to distrust the song of spectacle. If you stare long enough at a wound, it starts to narrate itself. He had learned to write counter-narratives. Jealousies, debts, angles of approach. Things with fingerprints. Let's get the airport logs, he said. I want to see that 312.00 in their system, not just your copy. I want a list of everyone with access from crate to gallery. And we'll keep this on a need-to-know basis. If anyone calls the press, anyone, I will find their phone before the headline lands. Helena nodded again. The knot in her hair did not loosen. They rode up. In the security office, a bank of monitors watched rooms that pretended to sleep. A guard with a bitten thumbnail rewound footage from earlier in the week. Jonas watched the sarcophagus under its bell jar of glass. A dark loaf in a sterile world. Nothing moved. Nothing breathed. On a different camera, school children drifted like bright fish, tugged away by a teacher when they pressed noses to the Egyptian world. Rewind to this morning, Jonas said. The guard did. Jonas saw the crane in the conservation bay, the straps, the scale, the bureaucratic ballet. He watched himself walk into frame, touching his gloves to his pocket as if confirming he still existed. The only thing that flexed was the red cursor on the timeline. Detective, Helena said, her voice softened by the fluorescent hum. You know what people are going to say if this gets out. People say anything that frees them from thinking. He He kept his eyes on the monitors. I'm not people. Helena allowed herself half a smile that died before it could become a habit. You haven't asked me if I believe. I don't need you to believe, Jonas said. I need you to document. They went their separate ways with the efficiency of a pact. Jonas climbed the museum steps to sunlight that had the color of a scalpel. Zurich was the kind of city that wore its order like a pressed shirt. Trams stitched through the streets on rails that sounded like decisions. Jonas walked to his car and phoned the registrar's office to request the full death log for the last 7 days. He added a second call to his partner to pull the Malin file, to check times down to the minute, to verify the autopsy weight again against hospital records. On the way back to the precinct, his radio spat a burst of static and then the dispatcher's voice, ordinary as a shopping list. Units be advised, incident on tram 4 near Central. Multiple injuries reported. Jonas felt the world tilt, not physically, but in the ledger he kept in his head. He turned the car toward the river, lights silent, sirens still. He didn't need speed yet, he needed precision. He needed the timestamp, the count, the witness names. By the time he reached the cordon, the tram sat at an angle, one front wheel kissing the curb like a drunk's apology. Glass made a glittering apron around it. People were standing because that's what people do when they don't know where to sit with fear. 2 bodies lay under white sheets, the wind trying to sculpt them into flags. A paramedic spoke to a woman whose hands shook in small, tireless loops. Break fault, an officer told Jonas. We've got 2 confirmed. 2. Jonas kept the number to himself. He didn't look at his watch, and then he did because he couldn't help it. 11:17. He saw the museum in his mind, the freight scale, the display with its calm digits. When he stepped away to make a call, he found he had already dialed Helena. She answered on the first ring. Don't, he said quickly. Don't weigh it. There was silence, the kind that isn't stillness. Then Helena exhaled. We already did, she said. We had conservators moving a statue and the scale was free. How much? 144 kilograms, she said, in a single rise. The noise of the city went thin around him, like air at altitude. He watched a white sheet lift and fall with the smallest wind, a tide in miniature. He thought about the guard's phrase, the way superstition slots itself into a mouth when facts run out. It feeds, Jonas said, and hated himself for saying it aloud. Detective, Helena asked. I heard you, he said. Seal the gallery. Lock down the footage. From this moment, nothing moves without me. He ended the call and stood with the sun on his face, feeling the arithmetic tighten its grip. Somewhere under cool glass, a coffin had gained the weight of 2 strangers he could not yet name. The city kept breathing. The balance kept waiting. And Jonas Meyer, who did not believe in curses, felt the first cold draft of something counting. Airports keep time the way surgeons keep scalp cells. Numbered, sterile, unforgiving. The cargo terminal at Zurich's Cloten smelled of hydraulics, and coffee turned mean on a hot plate. Jonas signed into the customs office, where a woman with square glasses and a rectangular smile slid a tablet across the counter. He spoke softly, as if loudness might jostle the math already vibrating in his skull. Shipment CTH 92177, he said. Origin Luxor. Receiving party, Zurich Antiquities Institute. She keyed it in. The tablet blinked, thought, produced a stack of documents like cards from a rigged deck. Here, she said. Arrival scan. Weight on landing, 312.00 kilograms. Photographs at intake. Seal numbers matched the Egyptian export manifest. She looked over the top of her glasses. I've heard the rumor. I haven't, Jonas said, and tucked the tablet under his palm so she couldn't see his eyes. On the screen, high-resolution boredom. A crate on a pallet, stamped with arrows that told gravity where to aim. The seal tags, plastic-numbered loops, were intact in the photo. The weighbridge readout showed 312.00 with the indifferent neatness of a cashier's drawer. Do you have chain of custody logs? He asked. She pointed to the entries. Cargo landed at 2:13, cleared by 6:28 after radiation scan. Pallet moved to bonded storage with 2 guards. Signed out by museum courier at 9:02. There's footage. Footage showed a forklift's patience. No one danced around the crate. No one slipped a barbell into the cedar. The world kept its weight and moved it as prescribed. Thank you, Jonas said. He emailed the entire packet to himself, then to the case drive, then to Elise Bauman at the registrar because he had already decided she was his metronome in this mess. Back in his car, he dialed Cairo. The Egyptian Antiquities Ministry used phones built for heat and argument. The line thrummed, clicked, and then a man spoke in English polished by bureaucracy. "This is Farouk," he said. "You are the detective from Switzerland asking about a box that is now a circus. I'm asking about an artifact that was weighed at 312.00 kilograms in your custody and arrived at 312.00 in ours," Jonas said, watching a plane run its thumb along the sky. "I want your export manifest and any notes from the excavation." "We have sent you all legal papers," Farouk said. KV-47 satellite locality. Provisional. The coffin was empty. No resin plugs, no human remains. Inert wood with bitumen traces. We documented with photographs, scans, everything you people like. "Inert," Jonas repeated, like he was trying on the word for size. "Yet you quarantined it for 10 days before release." A pause. Jonas let it stretch. He could almost hear Cairo's heat moving across Farouk's desk. "Standard procedure," Farouk said. "We have an annual audit. Also, there was a small concern about smuggling from a different site. We cleared it." "Smuggling by whom?" "By no one I will name without counsel," Farouk said pleasantly. "The coffin was clean. Your curator, Dr. Strauss, signed for a legal export. You have papers." "I do," Jonas said. "And I also have a death log that counts like a clicker in a bouncer's hand." He didn't know why he said that. He was not a man who talked in similes on the phone. "We do not issue curses with our artifacts, detective," Farouk said, voice cool. "Please do not import stories and invoice us for them later." "I'll try not to bill you for fiction," Jonas said, and ended the call before irritation could become a habit. He drove to the institute, where Helena had cleared a glass-walled conference room and spread records like a map that only made sense if you squinted. Photocopies of dig permits, emails with headers that marched in perfect alignment, a shipping manifest that listed the crate's dimensions and weight the way one might list a pet's age at adoption. "Luxor provenance," Helena said, tapping a black and white photo. "Sand. A rectangular bite taken from the desert. A trench shaded by a tarpaulin faded to the color of once blue. Satellite site near KV-47. The main tomb is Hormheb's. This is likely a late intrusive burial or an unrelated cache. The coffin is 3rd intermediate period. Cedar, bitumen. A conservative decorative program." "And your man in the sand?" Jonas asked. "Dr. Karim Al-Hassan," she said. "Independent archaeologist with a long CV and longer enemies. He has worked under permits with reputable teams and also on projects that make the ministry chew its tongue. He's in Zurich this week, consulting on a Levantine collection. I requested the interview you wanted. He agreed." "Good," Jonas said. He watched his own reflection in the glass table, split by staples and string. "What about these glyphs?" He slid a print toward her, close shots of the lid's upper register. The carving was crisp, the kind that survives centuries because it was cut like a decision. In the cartouche banding the chest, a phrase that Jonas would have ignored if he hadn't been warned by the outline in his head, to balance the breath of the city. "It's an odd formulation," Helena said. "There's no canonical phrase like that in funerary inscriptions. The closest would be weighing the heart against the feather of Ma'at, divine balance. But breath of the city? Cities aren't weighed. Unless, Jonas said. She shook her head. Unless someone wanted to forge a myth modern ears would swallow. Karim told me during intake that he thought the lid bore an original devotional statement, not a workshop formula. He also said, off the record, that the site felt wrong. Define wrong. He said the sand was too loose in one corner of the shaft, that the air tasted metallic. It's all very poetic, which is why I didn't put it in the intake report. Jonas took in the shipping manifest again. Luxor outbound, weight verified by bonded scale. Zurich inbound, weight matched. Everywhere else, the ledger remained tidy. The only numbers that had misbehaved grew after the coffin met the city. You still think someone's gaming us? Helena said, reading his face. I think someone always is, Jonas said. Show me the internal chain from delivery to display. She had that too. Cage keys logged, access badges pinged, camera sweeps noted in a schedule that looked like Insomnia's calendar. No gaps, no midnight miracles. Kareem arrives at 3, Helena said. You'll like him. He's charming like wet paint. Before the interview, Jonas went down to the gallery alone. The sarcophagus lay under its glass, which now reflected his face in softened ripples. The hieroglyphic Anubis watched him with the closed attention of a turned-off television. He pressed his hand against the glass, felt the hum of the HVAC, the museum's regulated breath. He tried to imagine Luxor, the excavation tent flapping at noon, the flutter of papers weighed by rocks, a man with a hat whose brim had learned to be dust. He imagined the coffin in the trench, blackened with waking to air again, the heat pulling sap ghosts up from its grain. He imagined the first weighings, men in fluorescent vests at a desert airport tapping the display and going to smoke. At 3 sharp, Kareem Al-Hassan walked into the conference room in a linen suit that had survived a different climate. His beard trimmed to a scholar's neatness, sunglasses folded into a pocket like a promise. He smiled with half his mouth. Detective, he said, I was told the coffin eats. I was told you falsified records under pressure, Jonas said. So we're all operating in folklore. Helena made a cautionary sound and poured coffee. Kareem accepted it like a sacrament. I falsified the donor's letter because the donor wanted his name closer to greatness, Kareem said, unblinking. But I did not falsify weight. The crate left us at 312 kilos. I have the hands that lifted it still remembering. The ministry hinted at smuggling, Jonas said. The ministry hints at smuggling every time a field worker keeps a bead in his pocket for luck, Kareem said. They are not wrong to be suspicious, but I did not smuggle from that trench. There was nothing to smuggle except the thing itself and sand is not worth the paperwork. Jonas slid the close-up of the lid across the table. What does this say to you? Kareem lowered his face to the photograph as if listening to wood. He traced the register without touching it. An oblique text, he said. Workshop hand. The phrasing is performative. To balance the breath of the city. He looked up. I told Helena the same. Not canonical. It reads like a rumor carved into cedar. Why carve a rumor? Because rumor outlives paper, Kareem said. He sipped his coffee, winced at its Swiss sobriety. And because patrons like a story. Even in the third intermediate period, priests had to pay for plaster. Jonas kept his tone flat. You said, at the sight you heard it groan. Kareem's smile did not move. I said the crate groaned when lifted. Because wood groans. Because ropes complain when asked to work. But if you want the ghost version, when we pulled it from the shaft, the air went cold enough to nick your teeth. The men stepped back. A dog that had been sleeping in the shade stood and would not look at the trench. I have been in many shafts. This one felt like a hallway with someone at the end. Helena said dryly. He writes like this in his grant applications. It's why people give him money. And you believe the weight is rising with deaths? Kareem asked Jonas directly. You, a practical man. Do you believe it? I believe in digits, Jonas said. And I believe in timing. Kareem leaned back. Then perhaps you will also believe this. The old stories say when a city cheats the scale, when it calls murder accident and folds infants into statistics, the scales must be set elsewhere. The heart is weighed against a feather. The city is weighed against itself. If the official mouth lies, the wood remembers. Anubis scale, Jonas said, trying not to let the phrase sound like a costume. Yes, Kareem said softly. A metaphor, I thought, until your curator phoned me this morning with a voice that made metaphors seem cheap. Jonas watched the man's hands. They were steady around the coffee cup. People lied with stories, but their fingers told the forensic truth. The shipping manifest shows no variance until Zurich, Jonas said. So either physics begin to fail at our border, or the mechanism is local. Local is a polite word, Karim said. It means guilty. Jonas slid a consent form across the table. You'll provide your field notes. The ones you did not send the ministry. The ones you keep for when the ministry forgets to pay for photocopies. Karim tilted his head, considering the form like a chessboard. Then he signed with a flourish that made his name look older than his face. Detective, he said, I will give you my notes, and I will warn you. If this is what I think it is, notes are only the conscience of the thing. The thing does not care what we call it. Good, Jonas said, standing. Because I don't care what it calls itself either. They walked him out. At the door, Karim paused. Tonight, he said, almost conversational. You should keep your radio near your ear. The city is not finished breathing. Jonas pretended he didn't notice the draft that slipped down his spine at the same moment the museum's HVAC coughed. He collected the manifest copies, the customs footage, the permission for notes. He pocketed a card with Karim's Swiss number, and he arranged, formally, on paper like an oath, to meet the archaeologist again, tomorrow morning, with the registrar's mortality tables on the table between them. They met again without a museum's manners. Karim chose a bar that used to be a bank, a vault door left in place as a joke. The drinks came in heavy tumblers that felt like they belonged on ledgers. Outside, Zurich breathed with the orderly patience of a city that had learned how to fold its noise into trams. Inside, the room smelled of citrus peel and the copper of old money. I've been told confession purges, Karim said, lowering himself into the leather the way a man agrees to a bad idea. He wore the same linen suit but with a loosened tie, as if the day had finally convinced him to come down from a hotter country. I can't promise purge, but I will give you the facts that make me a smaller man. Jonas let him speak. The best way to get truth out of a storyteller is to give him an audience that doesn't applaud. I falsified a donor letter, Karim said. I implied a patron's grandfather paid for season 2 of a dig that season never existed. It is a victimless vanity except for the part where it is not, because vanity never stops at itself. I also downplayed a field hand's fall into the shaft by calling it a stumble and not a drop. He bruised a rib. He kept working because we all keep working. There was pressure. The ministry delayed the permit renewal. The university in Cairo delayed per diem. The Zurich Institute hinted that provenance would open doors the way a locksmith does. He looked up, measured Jonas's expression, found nothing generous there, and continued anyway. The money does not come in a bag with a skull and crossbones, he said. It comes in the form of not having to teach 9 sections of introduction to pottery to children who want to sell antiquities on Instagram. So I polished the story. I did not touch the weight. And the myth? Jonas asked. Did you polish that too? Karim's mouth twitched into a humorless curve. No, that was already finished when I found it. I did not invent Anubis scale. The metaphor is older than our bad habits. But in Luxor, that phrase on the lid, asterisk to balance the breath of the city asterisk. I thought it was a priest's flourish, a scribe with delusions of literature. Felt present. Not from a mortuary workshop pattern book. A bespoke line for an anxious patron. He paused. I told Helena as much. Off the record, yes. I didn't want the ministry to call me a fantasist again. Jonas watched the old vault door. The circular handle had the gravity of a planet. You also said the air went cold, he prompted. Karim shrugged, palms up. Some shafts exhale. This one inhaled. The men swore they heard would complain like an animal. I heard it too. When we winched the coffin up, the ropes whined and something inside the cedar answered. Not hollow, not solid. If I were a poet, I would say it groaned like a boat keeling. I am not a poet, so I will say, it made a sound wood makes when it stops pretending to be a tree and starts being a container again. He reached into his messenger bag and produced a notebook bound in dirty canvas. The pages had been numbered in a patient hand. He opened to a spread of sketches. Shaft plan, measurements, a cartoonish jackal head in the margin because even serious men have margins. These are my field notes, he said. I didn't send them because Cairo rarely asks for drawings, only for stamps. But here is what I wrote the night we packaged the coffin. Asterisk lid inscription odd. Not personal. Reads like civic injunction. Men afraid. I told them it is only cedar. Dog would not approach pallet. Ropes creak. Crate answers with lower tone. Felt slight change in air pressure, ears popped. Weight at Luxor Depot, 312.00 kilograms. Note, vendor's analog scale agreed to within 1 kilo. Will reweigh in Cairo. Consider theological reading. Scale not heart but polis. Asterisk. Polis, Jonas repeated. City. The Greeks infected us all, Karim said. But yes, a civic heart. A balance held not for a person but for a place. Forgive me if I liked the idea before it began to behave like a spreadsheet. Jonas took a slow breath. There's something else you said to Helena, he said, watching Karim's fingers. That increments match flesh mass, not bones. Karim stared at him. She told you that. She did not, Jonas said. I told her that after the registrar sent me autopsy numbers. But I want to hear why you think it. Karim's eyes narrowed, then softened, and whatever guard he had lifted dropped a few inches. Because old accretions teach us what decays first, he said quietly. At the site we found linens stained brown with what used to be skin. No bones. Not unusual in certain soils. But the coffin's ornamentation, the priests who made it were obsessed with heart and breath, not with calcium. If this is a scale, it weighs what leaves the quickest. Flesh is time's first tithe. Jonas did not admit the numbers that had already convinced him, that the tram deaths, added to the exact autopsy weight of Lutz, sat like true stones on the ledger, that the registrar's tables showed bodies at the end of their flesh and beginning of their ash. He did not mention how Elise had cross-checked hospital scales against mortuary slabs until the differences flattened to 1 and 2 grams, differences the coffin seemed to refuse. Suppose it's not mysticism, Jonas said by reflex. Suppose it's a fraud that likes mirrors. Then it is still a crime, Karim said. And then I am useful to you in a different way. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, becoming suddenly practical. I'll tell you who would stage a spectacle. Not Helena, she believes in method more than donors. Not me, I want tenure, not jail. A guard with debts? Perhaps. A restorer who wants a promotion? Perhaps. But they would need access to your registrar before the registrar speaks. Your part for woman, Elise. If the coffin jumps before she publishes the death, then someone is listening to a more honest clerk. You misheard me, Jonas said. I didn't say it jumps before she publishes. I said it jumps before the announcement. The entry, the internal act, seems to be the trigger, which means the box responds to a bureaucratic truth, not a public one. Karim's face opened into something like admiration. That is elegant, he said. A machine that measures the moment a city admits its losses. It also means timing can be falsified, Jonas said. Someone could enter a death to make a number change, then reverse it, then claim outage. Can Elise do that? Karim asked. Not without audit, Jonas said. She lives inside audits. Karim let out air he'd been holding. Then we are left with the thing that isn't supposed to exist, he said, which is the thing archaeologists live for until it makes them look ridiculous. He pushed the notebook across the table. Jonas flipped a few pages. Pencil rubbings of the lid's inscription. A diagram of the shaft with little crosses where rope burned fingers. A note in the margin. Asterisk balance as civic instrument? Urban ledger? Ask Hanan about late-period apotropaic coffins. Asterisk. Why send it to Zurich? Jonas asked. Why not keep it in Cairo if it's so odd? Because shipping is part of the performance, Karim said. Because the ministry wanted to show our international partners that we are generous. Because Zurich pays for conservation workshops and short courses and everything that oils the machine. And because, frankly, shipping it away meant it was no longer our problem if it was a problem. He said the last part with the tired candor of a man who hasn't slept well in a decade. They left the bar when the room had begun to hum with conversations that could be exchanged between mouths. On the sidewalk, the air had a bite the Nile never did. Jonas shook Karim's hand because not doing so would have been an editorial stance on human worth. "You'll be available tomorrow," Jonas said. "I have nowhere better to be than inside a paradox," Karim said. He tapped the notebook Jonas had tucked under his arm. "Keep that. If I die tonight, I prefer my lies to be archived." "Is that humor?" Jonas asked. "Or an attempt to make me call patrol to your hotel?" "It is a way of saying I do not like how things whisper at my back in this city," Karim said. "And it is a way of asking you to take seriously the possibility that objects behave better in deserts than in rich cities." Jonas watched him go, a gray figure swallowed by a street lined with banks that had once been safer places than churches. He turned his face to the museum's general direction and felt, absurdly, as if the building had a pulse he could hear through traffic. He did not go home. He went instead to the institute, where the night staff had learned to stop flinching when he entered. In the conservation bay, the freight scale sat idle, its red digits an unblinking eye. The sarcophagus lay under glass upstairs, guards posted like punctuation. "Don't touch anything," he told the guard who didn't need the instruction. He stood alone with the glass between him and the wood. He tried the trick he hated in witnesses. He asked himself how he felt. He felt like a number under a pencil about to be erased and written again. At 23:41, his phone buzzed with a message from dispatch. "Langstrasse. Stabbing. On scene units requesting homicide. One male, estimated 30s. Asterisk asterisk, the kind of street where the city's breath collects in alleyways, where neon insists on its own innocence." Jonas's stomach dropped the way a lift does when the cables tighten. He called Helena without thinking. "Don't weigh it," he said into the ring. "Not until I—" "We didn't," she said, over the faint echo of the gallery's air. "But the platform just registered. We didn't place it. We didn't move it. The digits jumped." "How much?" 68 kilograms, she whispered, as if smaller sound could make smaller truth. "In one pulse. And the glass, Jonas, the glass did this." Her breath hitched. It bowed, as if something inside pressed up, gently once. He listened to her breathing and the machine's silence and the undertow of the city's noise. Somewhere on Langstrasse, a body cooled toward the number the coffin had already taken. Somewhere, Anubis kept score without looking at the clock. Jonas closed his eyes for one beat, then two, and when he opened them he could almost see, in the reflection on the glass, a plane of black would rise a fraction, exhale, and settle back into patience. The registrar's office occupied the corner of a municipal building that pretended to be anonymous and failed. Clean glass, a lobby with an art piece made of numbers, the smell of paper warmed by electronics. Jonas buzzed through 2 doors and found Elise Bauman in a room lined with shelves. Not books, binders. Each spine held a year and a barcode, as if mortality could be cataloged into obedience. Elise was medium in all visible categories, height, build, voice, but her eyes had the precision of calipers. She wore a gray cardigan like an accountant's flag. On the desk, an arrangement of monitors presented the city as columns and rows, lives abstracted into alphanumerics. "You brought the circus," she said, without looking up. "I brought a scale," Jonas said. "The circus came on its own." She clicked a window closed and faced him. "I've already started. You gave me customs logs and museum weighings last night. I cross-checked every death recorded in the period you sent. Ready to be unhappy." "Always," he said. She rotated one monitor toward him. A spreadsheet spread like a low tide, cells exposed, formulas tidy. At the far right, a column highlighted in pale yellow, delta mass, grams. The numbers sat there, too exact, like a confession that had tidied its grammar before speaking. "Every death recorded in Zurich proper from the day the crate entered the city onward," Elise said. "For each, the last documented full body mass prior to death, hospital scale, clinic scale, military ID, driver's license estimate where that's all we've got, corrected for clothing per forensic standard." For post-mortem, autopsy scales when available. I used the more conservative figure each time. She tapped the yellow column. When you sum each day's totals and compare to the coffin's increments, you get a mismatch of 1 to 2 grams, either direction. It is not random. It is a refusal to be sloppy. Jonas leaned in, reading down the column as if somewhere the numbers might admit showmanship. What about the tram incident? She highlighted the 2 tram deaths. The row sums matched the coffin's plus 144, less 1.7 grams that she had flagged with a note. Hospital gurney pad adhesion probable. Subtract? He felt something along his spine goose-step into place. What if the museum scale is faulty? Jonas said, because he had to say the sentence out of fairness to reality. I thought of that, Elise said. They used a freight scale traceable to meta standards. They verified with test weights that have serial numbers longer than prayers. They filmed the readings with timestamp overlays. If it's a fault, it's the sort that wins prizes for its consistency. Jonas glanced at the shelf behind her. A binder labeled 1986 leaned against 1987 like tired colleagues. The coffin responds to who, exactly? The dead or our acknowledgement of them? Elise turned to a second monitor. That's the other thing, she said. Look. She brought up a timeline view, an ugly but honest series of marks. Red bars for deaths, blue dots for museum weigh-ins, green pins for the registrar's internal entries. The blue dots and green pins danced close enough to touch noses. The coffin's jumps correlate not with public announcements, Elise said, but with the second I hit enter on the internal record, not when the coroner files the final, not when the obituary runs. The act of entry, detective. The city says, we have lost this person. And the box answers. Answers what? He asked. Thank you for your honesty. Or, I was counting already. She shrugged, angry at her own metaphor. You asked if it knows sooner than we do. Sometimes it does. A few of these, see here? She clicked open a handful of rows. The museum recorded an increment before my office processed the file. But when I checked the hospital's internal timestamps, nurses' entries, machine logs, the death occurred minutes before. The coffin jumped within seconds of those, as if it lies closer to the machinery than our bureaucracy does. So the box is listening at the wall, Jonas said. Or the wall runs through the box, Elise said. We deal in definitions of when a person becomes a number. The box seems to prefer its own definition. She printed a sheet, old-fashioned, and handed it to him. Here, she said, 2 weeks of entries, cross-checked. Notes in the margin for the outliers, the dozen grams that get lost to blankets, the 5 to 7 that get lost to suction canisters. Ignore the digestive tract variables. I adjusted for post-mortem interval. It gets boring if you do it right. Boring is what I pray for, he said. Anything about geography? Only deaths registered to Zurich addresses. Across the Canton line? Nothing. Bern? Nothing. He thought of the call after midnight, the Langstrasse stabbing, the way Helena's voice had made the number sound like a person's shadow. We may have to test that more formally, he said. Ethically? She asked. Statistically, he said. She grimaced. You're going to have to talk to lawyers anyway, she said. If there's going to be a citywide panic, we should at least spell the panic correctly. He paced through the small room, which was barely big enough for pacing. You keep audit logs of your own? He asked. Keystrokes? Entries? Retractions? Every action is hashed and mirrored, she said. You can't add a death without leaving fingerprints. Good, Jonas said, because one human explanation is someone dicking around with entries to make magic happen. Let me put it another way, Elise said, her voice flat. If someone wants to fake a city's mortality, they have to come through me. They can't do that without me knowing. If you suspect me, say so cleanly. Jonas stopped. I don't suspect you, he said, with the plainness of a man who knows plainness is a gift. I suspect patterns. I suspect the way stories make people behave like stories. I suspect I'm tired. Good, she said, and the word in her mouth was surprisingly gentle. Tired people keep fewer secrets, including from themselves. Her printer chewed another page. She glanced at her watch. "We can set up a live mirror," she said. "A screen here and a screen in your museum. When I enter a death, you watch the box. If there's a lag, we can measure it. If there isn't, we can be more afraid." "Do it," Jonas said. They spent the next hour on bureaucracy's choreography. IT's grudging approval, Helena's signed consent. A secure channel stitched between a registrar's terminal and a gallery's security console. The feed at the Institute showed the freight scale's idle zeros and the glass vitrine's reflection of ceiling lights. In Elisa's office, a small window waited for entries. "Okay," she said. "We'll pick 3 ordinary cases. Nonviolent, expected, already in the queue." She glanced at Jonas. "We won't cause any. We'll record them." He nodded, grateful for her distaste. "Do you have names?" "I have numbers," she said, and pulled up the first. An 84-year-old woman at a nursing home in Erlikon, heart failure, death certified at 9:07 by an attending. The second, a hospice case on the Gold Coast, metastatic cancer, expected within the hour. The third, a neonatal loss at the University Hospital, lived 38 minutes, mass 3.4 kilograms. Elise hesitated over the third, her fingers hovering. "Sometimes I hate my job," she said. "I would hate you if you didn't," Jonas said. At 9:12, she typed. The woman's death went from paper to record. On the museum feed, the freight scale's zeros twitched. 1 beat, 2. The digits climbed as if a hand pressed them from below. Plus 61, 800G. The glass on the coffin's enclosure didn't move. If it did, it was beyond the camera's generosity. Elisa's face didn't change. She made a note. "Lag. 2.4 seconds from return key," she said. "That's not a network round trip. That's almost a vindictive coincidence." They waited for the second. At 10:03, the hospice nurse called. Elise took the call on speaker so Jonas could hear the unremarkable sadness of the voice. 10:09, she hit enter. The freight scale kissed plus 52, 200G. Jonas wrote the number as if writing it could lessen it. The neonatal death came through at 10:31. Elisa's knuckles went white. She paused long enough to make an enemy of herself, then did her job. The freight scale stepped, plus 3, 400G. Jonas pressed the heel of his hand against his sternum, surprised at the crude animal instinct to cover his heart. Elise stared at the screen. "It responds to truth declared," she said softly, repeating her own phrase to test if it tasted different now. "Or it forces us into the truth we would rather not declare." He checked his watch. "What about the ones that come before you type? The ones overnight?" She pulled another file. "The Langstrasse stabbing," she said. "Time of pronouncement 23:44 by EMS. But the first unambiguous entry on a machine was the ER triage tablet at 23:42. Nurse recorded, patient unresponsive, no pulse, and tapped the status that opens a death pathway. She showed him the log. Museum message to me, timestamped 23:41. "Did your curator misread?" She shook her head. She didn't. The scale server clock syncs to a different NTP source than ours. A few seconds off, but not enough to cover 3 minutes. The box moves when the city knows, not when we announce. Sometimes the machines know through habit before we admit to ourselves. Jonas thought of the way a heart monitor draws a last straight line and no one speaks for a moment, as if the act of saying it ends something beyond the room. He had been in rooms where words were knives. Murder, accident, suicide. He had been the mouth that turned a private catastrophe into a public ledger. The idea that a wooden box could insert itself as a kind of clerk made him feel irrationally offended. Could someone have automated it? He asked, grasping at the last wire. A feed from hospital servers to a device under the pallet? "I had IT scan for unauthorized equipment last night," Elise said. "Nothing. No rogue Wi-Fi, no Bluetooth, no hidden wiring. The freight scale is brute, Jonas. It wants a single thing, mass." A courier knocked and set down a packet. Kareem's scans and notes Elise had requested. She slid it aside without opening it. Work triaged itself into piles, and the pile called "What the City is Weighing" had grown fat. Jonas stepped to the window. Outside, a schoolyard itinerary. Children in fluorescent vests herded by a patient adult, the bright hats like candy. He wondered if any of those hats would one day be numbers on Elisa's screen, if all cities carried their own abacus in a room like this. His phone buzzed. A message from Helena. Security footages. At 9:12, faint vibration in the glass.
Godzina 10:09. Same.
10:31, measurable bowing at 0.8 millimeters. Sending clips. Asterisk asterisk, he rubbed his temple until it hurt. It flexes, he said, half to himself, as if breathing. If it breathes, I resign, Elise said. Find me a machine in there and I'll keep my pension. A second message arrived, not from Helena. An unknown number, then a name, Kareem. Asterisk, when the scales break, the city pays. We are at 846 by my count. Are your numbers the same? Asterisk. Jonas didn't answer. He looked at the yellow column of Elisa's spreadsheet. The total ticked up quietly to match a city's private math. We need to consider crowd events, he said. Clusters. What happens when the city inhales too quickly? Elise nodded. Statistically, we have a festival week approaching, she said. Urban density spikes. Accidents climb. The curve always bulges. She paused. If you want to stop the box, you're going to have to stop living. He pocketed the printouts. Lock your door, he said. It's City Hall, she said, and managed to smile. The lock is mostly decorative. They worked until the walls felt closer. Jonas left her with the screens humming and crossed the plaza to air that had the thin quality of mid-morning. He resisted the urge to call Helena and tell her to unplug the scale, to bury the box, to salt the earth. He knew it would do nothing. He knew now that something patient had coiled itself around the city's wrist and was counting pulses. He told himself to go home. He told himself he would sleep. Instead, he drove by the museum, looked up at the dark glass, and thought, unhelpfully, of lungs. The next morning, before the press office could upload a polite paragraph about a man who died unexpectedly at home, the freight scale nudged. Plus 74, 300G in a single pulse. Jonas's phone buzzed a second later. Elise, no greeting. I haven't entered it yet. The ambulance only just called. Asterisk asterisk. The conservation bay turned into a surgery suite. Engineers in blue coveralls wheeled in cases of instruments with foam cutouts that made each wrench look sacred. A Meta-certified technician, square-shouldered and joyless, signed his name like a verdict at the bottom of a form and began dismantling the freight scale as if it had personally slandered him. Remove platform, he said. Photograph each stage. Log torque values. Helena hovered with a clipboard and the steady impatience of a woman who has memorized 3 procedures for everyone she believes in. Jonas stood back, hands in pockets, pretending he wasn't counting the seconds between each clink of metal. The sarcophagus lay strapped on its pallet, inert as a lie that has grown too heavy to move. Serials match, the technician said, tapping a plate. Calibration last month. No firmware anomalies. Level 2 within 0.03 degrees. Load cells clean. He swabbed dust from the corners like a dentist on a crusade. If this machine is wrong, it's wrong in a way that would make me famous. It isn't wrong. He reassembled the scale with the cruel efficiency of a man undoing a magic trick. Test weights marched onto the platform and held position like soldiers. 20, 50, 100, stacked combinations that made the digital readout climb and settle with the serenity of a monastery bell. No drift, no sulk. Verdict, Jonas asked. Your problem, the technician said, is not here. Comforting, Jonas said, and meant the opposite. Next came the ground-penetrating radar, 2 geophysicists with a cart that looked like a toddler's stroller and cost more than a high-end car. They rolled the antenna over the coffin's lid, across the sides, down the length of the pallet. A laptop bloomed cross-sections in grayscale, bands of brightness like weather. Orientation? One asked, and Helena pointed. Head end here. They swept again, slower. The images stabilized. Lid, void, plinth. No bright knots of metal. No hidden ballast. No traitorous skeleton tucked inside to explain a city's losses by simple physics. Interior reads as air, the geophysicist said, tapping a featureless stripe. Low dielectric. Your box is hollow. Hollow but heavier, Jonas said. Like guilt. He didn't expect the scientist to laugh, and he didn't. We can run a higher frequency for finer resolution, he offered instead, and did, and the answer didn't change. A materials lab team arrived with a suitcase ramp that unfolded like a polite bridge. They pressed a densitometer to the cedar, took readings along the grain, measured moisture content, checked for impregnation with resin or metal salts. The numbers came back boring. Cedar that had learned discipline, bitumen that had never promised to be exciting, humidity consistent with a climate-controlled gallery. No hidden alloys, no modern inserts, the lead conservator said. Density uniform to within expected range. Your object is exactly what it looks like. Except for the part where it isn't, Jonas said. They tried thermal imaging on a whim born of dread. An IR camera painted the coffin in false colors that turned the conservation bay into another planet. For a long minute, the image held steady. A cool body in a cooler room, edges warm where lights kissed glass. Then the freight scale chirped softly, just the electronics adjusting their boredom, and Helena said, "Shoo!" Though no one had spoken. On the thermal feed, a bruise of colder blue rippled across the lid. A pulse, not of heat but of its absence, as if something had inhaled from within and the wood skinned over the gap. "Did you see that?" the geophysicist asked too quickly, which was how scientists said my grant application just grew fangs. "Record," Helena said, already saving the clip with a file name that would shame no archive. Came again. Not on schedule, on temperament. A tide as small as a breath moving under a door. The camera dutifully recoded the world to explain it, and failed. Jonas stepped closer to the glass. He heard the coughed objection of a conservator and ignored it. "Open the vitrine," he said. "Absolutely not," Helena said. "Open it?" Jonas repeated, and for the first time since they'd met, he used the voice that moves people on sidewalks and in interrogation rooms. "We have cameras at every angle, for people here to swear. The moment we see a problem, you drop it back on. If something is exchanging energy with this room, the glass is part of the system. Give me 1 minute without it." Helena hesitated, then glanced at the thermometer and humidity readouts arrayed like cockpit instruments. 1 minute, she said, and her nod to the conservator was a firing squad blended with a prayer. They lifted the vitrine with suction cups and caution. Cool air washed the wood. Jonas felt the room shift not in temperature but in attention, as if the object noticed, a dog raising its head when the key turns in the lock. "Thermal cam rolling," someone said. The bruise of cold returned. A little tighter, a little darker. Jonas did the thing he had told himself not to do. He reached out and put his palm, lightly, against the lid's carved register. "Jonas," Helena snapped. His skin registered something no instrument could label without poetry. A give. Not soft, not elastic. The way the rind of a very old fruit yields a fraction before it refuses you. A pressure rose and fell under his hand. If wood could have a diaphragm, it had just exhaled into his palm. He drew back, peeling his fingers slowly so as not to insult the superstition forming in the back of his skull. "Okay," he said, voice steady by choice. "Okay." On the screen, the cold pulse shrank, colorist blues fading to dull greens. The digital thermometer blinked 1/10 of a degree down and then corrected, embarrassed. The conservator lowered the vitrine as if dropping a shield between soldiers. Everyone breathed again, or perhaps admitted they had been breathing the whole time. "Record everything," Helena said unnecessarily. They replayed the clip in slow motion until the pixels looked like a weather report for a planet that does not exist. The cold bloomed from somewhere near the cartouche, traversed outward in a ring, then collapsed. The timing was poor. Nothing else in the room had changed. No door, no draft, no tram of a truck on the street outside. "Let's assume rational causes," Jonas said, knowing he had said it too many times in 2 days. HVAC fluctuation. Floor vibration. Someone leaned on a bench 3 rooms away. HVAC logs show stable, the conservator said, eyes on a separate monitor. And I just pulled security from adjacent galleries. No movement. Seismic mic, Helena asked. We keep one near the foundation to watch for variance during delicate treatments. The log showed a flat line. The building had not admitted to feeling what their instruments felt. Jonas had the odd thought that perhaps admitting was the key to everything. They ran the scale again to see whether the coffin would humor them with a number. It refused. The digits stayed where they were, yesterday's arithmetic preserved like a pressed flower. You said you felt it give, Helena said finally, in a tone that demanded either confirmation or a retraction. I did, Jonas said, like pressing on a lung through a wall. Don't do that again, she said. I won't, he said, and wasn't sure whether he was promising her or himself. They closed the bay and moved upstairs to the security office. The guard on duty had watched the thermal replay enough times to grow out of fear and into apathy. Jonas took the wheel of the console. He pulled footage from the last week, synced it with Elisa's death entry timeline. They scrubbed to each increment. Seconds before each, the same phenomenon. A faint vibration along the lower edge of the glass. A shimmer in the reflections. The sort of movement you might attribute to your own blood if you wanted to keep your day intact. Milliseconds, Jonas asked. Between 2 and 5 seconds, Helena said, checking a timestamp overlay she had made out of stubbornness and coffee. Ahead of each mass change. Something inside signals, Jonas said. Then it takes. Or we notice the signal because we know it will take, Helena countered. Observer bias is the last religion. Let's test that religion, Jonas said. Tonight. He arranged for a night watch that was more than a man in a chair. They borrowed a vibration sensor from the materials lab and taped it to the vitrine's base. They requested a second thermal camera and set it to fixed capture with an external clock synced to the registrar's server. He told Helena to go home because there were things he needed to see without witnesses who would later ask him to repeat them. She didn't. She made coffee instead. At 2 in the morning, the museum was a cathedral for the god of controlled environments. Jonas walked the galleries with a flashlight he never clicked on. He'd spent enough midnight hours in apartments that held the smell of extinguished lives. This was cleaner but not kinder. He returned to the bay, sat in a chair angled to give him the coffin and the screens, and waited. At 3:07, a nurse somewhere in a nursing home wrote a note. 3:09, Elise typed in a name. Jonas watched his monitor display the mirrored entry because they had agreed they could not pretend to surprise the box anymore. At 3:09 and 2 seconds, the vibration sensor ticked, a fine tremor like a cat's purr. The thermal camera inked its small bruise on the lid. At 3:09 and 4 seconds, the scale digits stepped upward, respectful as pallbearers. Jonas wrote it down. He was done pretending that writing saved him. By dawn, he had pages of entries, deltas and lags, enough data to comfort scientists and insult priests. The relief that numbers bring hit him like a hangover. Temporary, punitive, vain. He rubbed his eyes and let the coffee go cold out of principle. When the museum opened to its first quiet visitors, he stood with Helena at the security bank and replayed the night. She watched without interrupting. So, she said at last, we have a hollow box that breathes cold and gains mass in sympathy with a city's losses. We have instruments that work. We have a registrar who is either a saint or a conspirator, and I don't think she's a conspirator. We have a detective who puts his hand on cursed objects. Don't call it cursed, he said, surprising himself with the heat in his voice. Curses are excuses. This feels like a contract. With whom? She asked. Whom? He said, weary. Grammar survives everything. Her phone buzzed. A message from the city's cultural office asking if they should postpone the festival due to traffic concerns. She laughed once, short and humorless. They will not postpone, she said. They will widen a sidewalk and call it safety. Jonas looked at the coffin, at the camera of a city squinting back at him through glass. Then we get ahead of it, he said. We map the pattern. We find the edges. And we pray that edges exist. On the screen, a clip replayed. Seconds before a number jumped, the faintest breath moved under carved cedar. The lid flexed a millimeter, maybe less, as if testing the air it had already decided to share. Zurich comforted itself with systems. People still broke. Jonas started with the one most likely to crack. Lucas Ryman sat in a narrow room behind the museum's security desk, shoulders hunched as if the ceiling had opinions. His uniform fit like a promise he hadn't kept. On the table, Jonas laid out a plastic folder as gently as a surgeon setting down metal. "Debt collection notices," Jonas said. 3 from the same agency. A bank letter that sounds kind until the last paragraph, where it says the word repossession. And a casino ban you pretended not to remember. Lucas stared at the laminate. His eyes were the gray of an elevator panel. "You copied my mail. I asked its owners to share," Jonas said. "You told Helena it feeds." "Why?" "Because I'm not blind," Lucas said, too quickly. "Because I saw the numbers change after the tram. Because we're all thinking it and someone had to say it out loud so it would stop being worse in our heads." Jonas watched the man's hands. No tremor, just a tightness around the nails that suggested he punished his cuticles when money talked. "If you wanted attention," he said, "you got it. But attention doesn't pay your interest. A trick might." "What trick?" Lucas said, defiant because people with nothing left still like a foothold. "You saw the freight scale. You tore the building open like a present. If there's a wire in that coffin, it's older than Christ." "You had access," Jonas said calmly. "Night shifts, master codes, blind spots you could learn by living with the cameras." Lucas shook his head hard enough to make the ceiling flinch. "The vitrine logs fingerprints. The freight scale lives behind a door I don't have a key for. The only time I touched the coffin was in my dreams. And you can arrest me for those if you want." "Where were you at 11:17 yesterday?" Jonas asked. "When tram 4 kissed the curb." "On this floor," Lucas said. "You have me on 2 cameras scratching my neck and reheating coffee. Ask the coffee. Takes forever." Jonas let silence do what it's best at. Lucas found his own reflection in it and softened. "I said, it feeds because I grew up with a mother who threw salt at her shoulder when the downstairs neighbor sneezed." Lucas muttered, "I have poetry in my mouth and nothing in my account. But I didn't touch it. I wouldn't know how." Jonas believed him, which made him irritated with himself. Belief is a door you close behind you without checking the lock twice. He moved up the chain. Helena Strauss received him with the stiff courtesy of someone who had slept in a chair and now resented the architecture of that choice. The glass between them and the coffin had collected fingerprints they hadn't had time to clean. In the reflection, she looked like a figure in an old thriller. Clipped hair, clipped sentences, a city turning behind her like a mechanism. "They're already accusing me," she said, crossing her arms without meaning to. "Donors want to know if I'm manufacturing a miracle to increase foot traffic. The ministry in Cairo wants to know if I'm manufacturing shame. The press wants a quote that says nothing and sounds like it says everything. I am doing my actual job in the negative space between those demands." "You stand to benefit," Jonas said. It hurt to say it had to be said. "More visitors, more funds, more leverage." "If I wanted that kind of leverage, I'd curate an Instagram account, not an apocalypse," Helena said dryly. "I look at wood for a living, detective. I expect it to behave. When it does not, I do not throw confetti. I call you, and I stand on the numbers I can defend in a room full of enemies." "Enemies?" Jonas asked. "Committees," she said, and he nodded because the words were synonyms. "Alibi," he said. She gave it. Meetings, emails, timestamps, the sturdy choreography of a public servant with receipts. She had been on a Zoom call with a foundation at the moment the tram deaths rolled into digits. The video captured her face at a precise minute that did not bend. "What about Kareem?" Jonas asked, gesturing toward the folder he still carried like a shield. "His record has texture." "Kareem's record is a tapestry," Helena said. "He embellishes. He shortcuts. He also brings us objects the ministry would otherwise sit on for 5 years. He lies about small things, which is how I know he isn't lying about this. A fraudster would have put a magnet in the plinth and a shill in the registrar's chair. Karim brought us a box and a headache and no scheme to profit from either. Jonas left her with a promise to triple security, motion sensors across the entire gallery grid, locks on the freight scale room, an audit trail with teeth. He logged the museum as a crime scene without saying the phrase in front of donors. He found Karim in a cafe that preferred brass to comfort. The archaeologist had that sleepless looseness that makes men charming until it breaks them. "Accuse me quickly," Karim said, easing a sugar packet open like it might decide to be venom. "I prefer blunt force to suspicion's long tail." "You have falsified before," Jonas said. "Under pressure, for money." "For tenure and dignity, which is to say for money," Karim agreed. "But not this. I do not stage hauntings. I don't have the stomach to watch outcomes I didn't choose." "Where were you last night at 2341? Jonas asked. "Langstrasse. In a rented bed that smelled of other men's shampoos," Karim said. "Alone. My phone streamed a football match I didn't care about. The hotel's Wi-Fi logs will show sorrow. The concierge will remember my request for an extra pillow because he frowned like it cost him personally to move feathers. You understand I still have to treat you as a suspect," Jonas said. Karim glanced past Jonas, through the window where the city's tidy life walked by. "I understand we are all suspects of a city that has chosen a scale." He slid a paper across the table, a translation draft of the lid's text, each sign traced with the fondness of betrayal. "There's a line I missed," he said, tapping a phrase. "Not canonical. When the mouth lies, the grain counts." A farmer's proverb bent into theology. A city official says accident. The ledgers say murder. A family says miscarriage. The midwives say birth. The box doesn't care what mouths want. "Poetry again," Jonas said, and pocketed the page because you keep the things that might prove you wrong. Back at the precinct, he did the thing police do when physics refuses arrest. He widened the net. He had techs crawl through the museum's network looking for radio noise, handshakes, pings from devices that shouldn't be there. He made them scan for EMI spikes, the sort caused by elevators, tram cables, thunder, the collective groan of modernity. If there was a ghost here, he wanted it to wear a uniform. His partner, Keller, breezed in with coffee and his usual lack of reverence. "You look like you've been holding your breath for a day," Keller said. "I read your notes. You ever heard of electromagnetic interference?" "I put it on the board," Jonas said, pointing at a list where EMI sat next to seismic and hoax and citywide psychosis. "If someone's running a coil under the floor, we'll find it." Keller grinned like a man who had never met a story he wouldn't heckle. "I know a lab that will bring a spectrum analyzer and make your day smell like ozone." They brought the lab. Two men unspooled cables like spider silk across the conservation bay. An analyzer sang the city's invisible weather into a waterfall of color. They added a loop antenna near the coffin, a loop near the registrar's monitor, a loop at the freight scale's load cell amplifier. "Baseline," the engineer said. He tapped a key. "Tram lines, 50 hertz hum with harmonics. Elevators, sporadic spikes. Museum lights, clean. HVAC, consistent. No anomalies at the frequencies that would move a scale or trick a sensor. If someone's using RF to talk to your instrument, they're violating laws of engineering I would like to break personally." "Glad to hear your religion is intact," Jonas said. They sat the analyzer on a long capture, an electronic ear against the city's chest. When the next increment came, Elise typed, the vibration shivered, the cold bruise bloomed, the spectrum held. No search, no whisper, just the old electricity of a city turning its lights on and off. "Negative," the engineer said. "If it's a signal, it's not one we can buy equipment to chase." Keller shrugged and threw his hands. "Then it's ghosts," he said cheerfully. "I prefer bribery. It files better." Jonas rubbed his face. He could feel the outline of his skull under his skin as if his head were the box and someone was keeping count inside. "Run a near-field scan along the vitrine joints," he said to the engineer, because ordering tests was how you keep from believing in jackalls. They did. The answer refused to change. By late afternoon, Jonas had body temperature coffee, a stack of negative results, and 3 living suspects who were either clean or exasperatingly subtle. He stared at the whiteboard where he'd written local trigger and drawn an arrow to registrar entry and another to museum phenomenon. He hated the diagram's neatness. The world behaves itself into pictures only when it plans to disobey. His phone buzzed. Elise, odd one, her text said. Death in Bern. Pronounced at Inselspittal. No Zurich linkage. Not in our queue. But check your scale. He turned to the live feed. The freight platform's digits had just climbed sharp, single, unambiguous. Plus 78, 900G. The vibration sensor pinged. On the thermal camera, the cold ring bloomed and faded like a bruise inhaled. Jonas called her. What did you enter? Nothing, Elise said. I'm looking at my own log. No keystrokes. The entry didn't come from me. It shouldn't be in our system at all. It isn't, Jonas said. But the box moved. Helena's message arrived before he could swear. Visitors report hearing a low hum before the jump. She had appended a clip. The audio was mostly room tone, then a sound like breath translated into machinery. Keller leaned over Jonas's shoulder, eyebrows up. I thought your rule was only Zurich, he said. It was, Jonas said. He felt the floor shift in that quiet internal way he had learned to dread, no tremor, only the map changing its legend. He looked at the number on the scale. He thought of a hospital in another canton where someone's name had been moved from one column to another. He thought of a lid that flexed like a diaphragm learning a new song. Maybe the city just got bigger, Keller offered. Or the ledger did, Jonas said. Outside, somewhere between neat streets, a siren went past, sprinting toward a life at the edge of a column. Inside, the coffin lay under glass and counted something that no map could border. Jonas felt the sudden, childish urge to put his hand on the lid again, to ask a question with his palm. He did not move. He stared at the number and knew 2 things. His suspects had lungs and alibis, and the box had just proved it could ignore the line where Zurich ended. They built a map because maps pretend to be answers. In the museum's conference room, Helena wheeled in a corkboard the size of a bed and spread a street atlas beneath acetate. Elise arrived with a laptop under her arm and the tired determination of a midwife. Keller brought pins because Keller believed in the persuasive power of colored plastic. Red for deaths, Elise said. Blue for increments. Green for entries in my system. She didn't ask permission. She started. Red pins spangled the city like a rash. Erlikon, Enge, Wipkingen, the long throat of Langstrasse. Blue pins, small, stubborn, clustered in a column along the edge of the map by the legend, because physically the coffin never moved. Green stickers went down where the registrar's internal entries happened, not where lives ended. Street addresses for the dead. Office addresses for the act of acknowledgement. There, Jonas said after a minute, the pattern didn't require a poet. Every blue correlates to a green, not to a red. We knew that much, Helena said. We've been watching the box answer when Elise presses the key. We knew it, Jonas said. But now we can hurt ourselves with it. Elise stood back, arms folded. Look at the borders, she said. Everything inside the city proper. Postal codes 8001 to 8099. I can make the map do it if you want. Don't, Keller said. My eyes already hate me. Everything inside triggers an increment when entered, she continued. Outside the canton? Nothing, unless the record points back to a Zurich address. Jonas's eyes went to the corner where a single blue pin had been taped with a question mark. Bern, last night. Explain that one, he said. Elise clicked open a window on her laptop and airdropped a file to Helena's screen. A municipal form, mean with boxes. Place of legal residence. Stadt Zurich. Temporary location at time of death. Inselspittal. Insurance and estate processing. Zurich Municipal Office. The death occurred in Bern, Elise said. But the legal residence domicile for civil processing is Zurich. The hospital system forwarded an eligibility pre-check to our office the moment the ER tablet switched the status to expected death. No public record, no obituary, just a machine handshake to verify jurisdiction. The box jumped after the handshake. So it's not the geography, Helena said softly. It's the paperwork. It's the mouth of the city saying mine, Elise said. The blue pins don't care where a heart stops. They care where a ledger opens. Keller whistled under his breath. Bureaucratic haunting, he said. Love that for us. They kept pinning. The clustering grew obscene. Care homes in Erlikon, hospital corridors, the train platform at Central where a man had once sat down and never stood up again. But the blue never obeyed longitude or tram lines. It obeyed jurisdiction, a membrane drawn in bylaws, invisible on foot, real in databases. Jonas touched, lightly, the red pin that marked the tram incident. 2 blue pins sat beside the map because Helena refused to pierce the paper where the coffin stood. What about births? He asked, though he knew the answer and hated himself for wanting proof. Elise didn't look at him. Neonatal cases, she said, and picked up a red pin that weighed almost nothing. She put it in the map where the university hospital's maternity ward lived. An infant who breathed for 38 minutes. She placed a blue pin beside the legend. 3,400 grams. She placed a green sticker at her own office's address. She didn't say sorry. She didn't need to. It responds to truth declared, Helena murmured, as if the phrase had acquired dry blood. Not to the event, to the admission. The admission is the event, Elise snapped, then swallowed the bite. Sorry, I've been living in verbs. When I type, I make a death reel in this system. The box likes my verbs. Jonas walked the perimeter of the board the way he walked a crime scene from outside in. Borders, river, canton line, the soft edge where Zurich becomes not Zurich without changing the brick. We have to test across the line, he said. A controlled case. Someone dies in Winterthur, legal residence Winterthur, no Zurich paperwork. The box should sleep. If it doesn't, our map is a liar. Ethically, Helena said again, because she liked that word as a seatbelt. Statistically, Jonas said, because he had nothing decent to buckle. They didn't have to fabricate an experiment. Cities oblige. An hour later, Elise's screen chimed. Winterthur, she said, grimly efficient. Ambulance call. Pronouncement at 11:14. Residence Winterthur. No Zurich intersection. She watched her own hands as if they belonged to someone more dangerous. I'm not entering anything. It's not ours. On the museum feed, the freight scale stayed at its current insolent number. The thermal camera stared. The glass did not bow. The city exhaled elsewhere and the box did not care. Control achieved, Keller said, as if that made him the scientist he wanted to be. Jonas slid his gaze across the pins until it hurt. Okay, he said. So, Zurich defines the deaths that matter to the box. Not by geography of the last breath, but by the bureaucracy that claims the body. By the truth declared, Elise said, less angry now, more resigned. She tapped the question mark over burn and replaced it with a sticker that said domicile ZH like a stamp on a passport. I ran the audit on last night's pre-check. It was automatic. No human typed anything, but the system opened a case pointer. The box answered. It prefers the first moment the city admits connection, even if the city pretends it hasn't yet. Jonas felt a pressure in his chest that had nothing to do with stairs. So if a body is found in a lake, he said slowly, and the police spend weeks arguing jurisdiction, if the mouth lies. The grain counts, Helena finished, half remembering Karim's translation. The box corrects the story. The room went quiet. There are silences that feel like antiseptic. This one felt like a debt collector outside a door. Pull the outliers, Jonas said. Entries where the mass increased more than the public tally that day. The nights where we got a blue pin without a red story. Elise nodded, already sorting. A handful of dates rose to the top like bones in a broth. Jonas bent over her shoulder. Unreported suicide, later recoded. Undocumented stillbirth. Fatal overdose coded accidental intoxication. Later amended. Elise had annotated each with the grim zeal of a woman who preferred order to absolution. It's balancing, she said. If the mouths fudge, the wood refuses. It is accounting. An audit, Jonas said. He thought of Kareem's papyrus. When the scales break, the city pays. He stared at the board until the pins doubled. How many to a threshold? Elisa's voice lowered as if numbers could hear their names. If we treat the inscription's obsession with nines as design and not superstition, the threshold is 999 souls, she said. A dramatic integer, yes. We're at 846 by the gross count. She clicked. By the box's account? 851. Where did the extra 5 come from? Keller asked, half dismissive. From the items nobody wanted to make into language, Elise said. A stillbirth that never left the midwife's hands. 2 overdoses coded as possible accident to spare families an insurance clause. A body in the river that went missing from one ledger and found its own way to the right one. Her jaw worked, not in anger but to keep words from shaking. The box does not care about mercy. Mercy is paperwork, Helena said, and then looked stricken by the truth of it. The museum's PA system coughed alive with a pre-recorded announcement about closing hours, then died. The room's hum returned, the undertone of a building maintaining its climate for dead wood and live salaries. Jonas took the pins between his fingers and pressed them into the board until his skin complained. We need to talk to the council, he said. If this accelerates during the festival, we'll hit your dramatic integer before the fireworks. They won't cancel, Helena said. They'll call it an economic necessity and hope their necessity doesn't have a number attached. Elise looked at the burn sticker again, at the way a checkbox had expanded the city's reach without a vote. There's something else, she said. I ran simulations. If you shut down public reporting, the box doesn't care. It follows the internal events. If you shut down internal events, people still die and hospitals still log and pre-checks still ripple. The only way to stop the count is to stop telling the truth to ourselves. Or to stop dying, Keller said, helpful as always. Jonas imagined City Hall decreeing that all deaths be processed in paper, in whispers in the back rooms of churches. He imagined the box flexing anyway, the thermal bruise pulsing without witnesses, as if the act of keeping a secret were itself an entry. He pulled his phone. Kareem had sent another fragment. Photo of a line from a transliteration, ink a faded brown. When the mouth lies, the grain counts. When the grain lies, the jackal watches. He didn't share it. He didn't need more religion in the room. Instead, he stood before the map and felt, with a clarity that made him colder, that the box was better at Zurich than Zurich was. It was more faithful than law, more cruel than mercy, more punctual than grief. It did not lobby or panic or negotiate. Counted. He put his palm flat against the acetate over the city, a child's gesture he allowed himself once. If we can't slow the deaths, he said, then we can at least slow the places where people make them easy. Crowd control, barriers, cops at intersections. We will make the world hostile to accidents for a week. Helena nodded, already texting a list that would make enemies in 3 departments. Elise remained at the board, eyes on Byrne's sticker. It's not just accidents, she said. It's decisions. It's secrets. I know, Jonas said. He stepped away and the overhead lights caught the acetate, a sheen like shallow water over streets he knew. The red pins were small, the blue ones smaller. They looked like nothing until you looked too long. He felt the box behind the wall of the room, patient as a metronome. For the first time since he'd put his hand on the wood, he felt a tilt in his beliefs, not toward curses, but toward something worse. A ledger that loved exactness more than people. He was a homicide detective, a clerk of ending. He had thought numbers were his shelter. Now he understood they could be his weather. Brief the chief, he said, voice flat to keep it from cracking. Tell him our city is being counted by something that does not negotiate. He didn't add the rest aloud. That law had stories about mercy and jurisdiction and the theater of cause. The box had the heartbeat of a machine that refused to lie. And somewhere in that refusal, Jonas could feel the jackal's gaze, impersonal, unblinking, utterly fair in a way that no human had ever endured. He stood alone with the map after the others left, and in the reflection of the acetate, He saw his own face ghosted over the city. For a second, no more, his reflection's mouth did not move when he moved. It was still, as if waiting for a number to catch up. He looked down at the pinned red, the precise blue. He was suddenly, stupidly certain. The coffin counted more faithfully than law and sooner. The museum at night had a temperature no thermostat could measure. The cool of money sleeping, the hush of climate control rehearsing its part as respiration. Jonas walked the corridors without turning his flashlight on. The floor gave back other people's footsteps. School tours, donors with careful laughter, a guard's lonely circuit. Upstairs, the Egyptian gallery waited like a stage that had decided to perform whether or not an audience came. Helena stayed because she had decided that leaving would be an admission. She wore a sweater that could not convince the air to be warmer. Keller sprawled in a rolling chair at the security bank and practiced skepticism on every screen. Elise joined by video, tiny window, gray cardigan, the background of binders and municipal light. She had set her terminal to mirror keystrokes to the museum's console as if to say, no surprises. The vibration sensor blinked a steady green, taped to the vitrine's base. The second thermal camera, its clock synced to Elise's server, stared at the coffin with the devotion of a parishioner. Sound check, Keller said, too loud, and then winced because loudness rippled in empty buildings like guilt. Rolling, Helena said, adjusting the mic stand they had propped near the vitrine, just above the seam where glass met steel. We'll catch whatever we can describe later. Jonas took the same chair he had the previous night, at an angle that gave him the coffin through a doorway, a theater box to protect him from his own superstition. He set his notebook on his knee. He wrote, *03:00, systems synchronized. 0 drift, *. He did not write. I can smell bitumen when the HVAC sighs. He did not write. There is a tone under the tone of this room. At 3:12, a nurse in Erlikon typed a note she would not remember. Elise spoke without drama. I'm about to enter a death. Expected. Heart failure. Her hands hovered over keys not because she feared them, but because she respected what they did. Ready. Ready, Helena said. Enter, Keller said, and Jonas could not tell whether the word was an instruction or a prayer. Elise pressed return. On the thermal camera, the first bruise of blue unfurled across the cedar, a tidal iris constricting. 2 seconds later, the vibration sensor ticked, a cat purring inside a cabinet. The freight scale digits stepped upward with the politeness of pallbearers. +59, 900G. The audio capture showed nothing but room tone and the scratch of fabric when Helena crossed her arms. They logged it. Jonas found that writing didn't steady him. He kept doing it anyway. The act of making lines on paper felt like drawing bars across an invisible window. At 3:14, everything changed in a way that would have sounded like drama if it hadn't been so measured. Audio first. A low thread so soft Keller thought the channel had picked up interference. He leaned forward, hand to his ear as if his body remembered radios from a previous life. The spectrum analysis, the toy the RF engineers had left hooked to a feed out of pity, did not move. The thread was not electricity. It was breath, not human breath. Demotic breath, if breathing could be written. A whisper too close to words and too far from mouths. Sibilants and soft stops. A cadence that belonged to a language carved more often than spoken. Helena's face did something Jonas had not seen it do. She emptied it, as if emotion could accidentally touch the object. Do you hear? Yes, Jonas said, because whatever he refused to name he had promised himself not to lie about. On the thermal feed, the cold contracted toward the cartouche band like a hand making a fist. The vibration sensor went from purr to tremor. Its graph climbed in neat teeth. Jonas felt the floor respond, not shaking exactly. A subaudible flex that made his molars consider their position. Registrar? He asked Elise, trying to keep the conversation in the corral of their protocol. Any entries? No, Elise said. He watched her eyes scan her own logs. Nothing on my side. No pre-checks. No. The freight scale jumped. A clean rise. +82,000G. Keller swore softly because that was his liturgy. No entry, he said. Who's dying? No one in my system, Elise said. But wait, she scrolled. Hospital incident at Hardbruck. EMS notes. Stabbing in progress. No pronouncement yet. The audio picked up something then. A thump so soft the mic almost called it air. Jonas realized he had stood without deciding to. He was at the glass before he could choose otherwise. The lid didn't move, no, it did in the way firm things move to remind you that you cannot forbid them. A convexity, a curve, a rise and fall that his palm recognized even before it touched. Don't, Helena said, but the word had the wrong tense. Jonas's hand was already on the wood. He gave the smallest fraction of surrender, as if a lung had exhaled under a wall and then pulled the breath back in jealousy. The cold peaked under his palm and slid outward, the thermal camera translating his superstition into color. He jerked his hand away and hated the way his body read its own pulse as if borrowing rhythm from the thing. Rising, Keller said, voice small. We're still rising. The display ticked up in a series of tiny steps. Not one theatrical surge, but a choice made many times per second. Plus 82, 000G to plus 82, 004G to plus 82, 015G. It stopped as decisively as it had begun. The vibration fell back to purr, then to wiggle, then to align. The audio's whisper wound down not by fading but by concluding, like a sentence that had reached its verb. Elisa's window chimed. She read what only she could read. ER tablet just recorded loss of pulse at 3:14, she said. Pronouncement pending. She looked up, empty of drama. Your box knew. Or we noticed, Helena said, stubborn as a habit. Jonas took 3 steps back from the vitrine and forced his breath into normalcy as if teaching it to someone else. He wrote, *03:14, audio phenomenon, sibilance, demotic cadence, thermal, concentric cold, maximum 0.8 degrees Celsius delta, mechanical, lid flexion, unmeasured, tactile give, subjective, mass, plus 82.000 kilograms in stair-step increments. Asterisk he underlined demotic and wished he had not. The museum did not like that they had a night. The air reasserted itself, systems purring the way domesticated engines do to prove their loyalty. Keller rolled his chair away from the bank and stood, coming closer to the coffin like a man testing a fence. What did it say? He asked the air, the recorder, the nothing. If it was saying. It didn't, Helena said. It counted. She glanced at Jonas's hand, the ink of his palm still ghosting the lid in her mind. Are you hurt? Only in the part that has opinions about wood, he said. His skin still tingled, a nervous border guard uncertain about its job. 10 minutes later, a second increment. Small, a flutter of numbers, a half-breath in the glass. Elise entered a hospice death and everyone hated their own efficiency. Keller said something unhelpful about how at least the ghosts obeyed metric. Jonas ignored him because anger would require a theory he didn't want to hold. At 4:02, a different phenomenon. The whisper returned, but not as breath, as pacing. The mic picked up a rhythmic scuff, 12 beats, a pause, 12 beats. Jonas felt his scalp register something ancient. The sense of a body near you that isn't yours. The thermal camera recorded nothing with legs. The vibration sensor jittered in sympathy and refused to draw a footstep. Is someone moving in there? Keller whispered reflexively, which humiliated him. He was not supposed to be the one who whispered. No, Helena said. Eyes on the thermal feed, on the lid that would not perform for them. Yes, no. The security camera, at the edge of a fisheye's distortion, caught a shadow. Not cast. Invented. A shape that didn't answer to a light source. It passed along the vitrine's glass like something considering the reflection it had been handed. The head had the wrong geometry for a human. An oblong suggestion. A snout constructed from reflection and refusal. Play that back, Jonas said, shocking himself with the steadiness he could still borrow. They replayed. Frame by frame, the shadow paced the base of the case. Its shoulders had a slope that would make a costume designer happy and a detective unhappy. It made a circuit, paused at the head end, made a circuit, paused as if listening to the pause. It did not vary. It did not seek. It behaved like an agent of a ledger, a clerk reviewing a line. "Jackal," Keller said, then laughed at himself with real contempt. "I can't believe You said it," Helena said quietly. "So nobody else had to." The audio whispered a final time, not sibilant now but consonants stacked like bricks. The thermal feed cooled, then warmed by a tenth, as if a breath had closed a circle. The scale did not move. Elisa's voice pulled them upward. "I have a suicide flagged for review," she said. "Police coded accident last week. A mending path is open. If the family accepts the insurance consequences, we'll correct it." "What happens if you do?" Keller asked, tired in his impatience. "The box will have already counted it," Elise said. "We will only be agreeing with it late." Jonas felt something align inside him the way shame aligns when you admit a lie. "We're not watching a miracle," he said. "We're watching a machine of attention. It listens for when the city becomes honest. Or worse, it enforces that honesty." Helena sank into a chair and let her shoulders drop an inch. "Then anyone who profits from lies will hate it," she said. "And anyone who profits from fear will love it. And we are between them with our cameras." The night thinned toward a light the museum didn't seek. The janitor came in, saw the people gathered, decided he didn't see them. At 5:10, the whisper was gone, the tremor asleep. The box lay under glass like a compliant object again. To pretend the hours had been ordinary would have been a kindness none of them were ready to manufacture. They packed like people leaving a sick room. Helena replaced the mic with the next ritual. Keller grumbled that he wanted breakfast in a language that didn't have a word for haunt. Elise signed off with the budget of words a clerk grants at dawn. Jonas stood alone before the vitrine a last minute, because leaving without that would feel like cowardice. He raised his hand and did not touch the lid. "You're counting us," he said, not aloud exactly. "I understand. I will still try to make you wrong." On the screen to his left, a message from Kareem arrived. A photo of a papyrus margin where a scribe's idle jackal watched an invisible scroll. The caption read, "When the scales break, the city pays." Jonas closed the message without answering. He watched the lid for one beat, two. In the glass, his reflection looked back with the wrong patience, and for a breath he thought he saw a second set of eyes in his own points of red that belonged to old stories. He blinked. They were gone. By the time he stepped into the morning, the museum's glass doors exhaled him into a city already moving. Trams stitching, coffee breathing, ledgers opening their mouths. In his pocket, the tally waited, 851 by the box's count, 846 by the city's, a difference that felt less like error than like a promise. By noon, the museum had the temperament of a courthouse. People walked softer, as if their shoes could be called as witnesses. Jonas took the conference room that faced the atrium, glass on glass, a public aquarium for administrators, and made it into a tribunal. Kareem sat at one end with his canvas notebook and a folder of scans. Elise occupied the middle with a laptop whose desktop was a heliostat of windows reflecting numbers at every angle. Helena stood. Standing made her kind, and flipped through a conservator's report with the finicky focus of someone who prefers molecules to myth. Jonas put a small evidence bag on the table. Inside lay a sliver of cedar no longer than a thumbnail, shaved from an inconspicuous defect at the footboard the night before. He had signed 3 forms to let Helena cut it. He put another bag beside it. The same procedure done 2 days earlier when the museum could still pretend this was going to be a paper. The tags read like timestamps in a marriage that was failing. "Density," he said. "Tell me." Helena gestured for the lab tech, who appeared as if called by an incantation made of spreadsheets. "We ran micro-CT on both," the tech said, sliding printouts onto the table. "Measured cell wall thickness, lumen size, void fraction. The older shaving suggests a bulk density of 0.51 g/cm superscript 3. The newer is 0.57. Moisture content unchanged. No resin impregnation. No additional mineralization. The material is more itself." More itself, Jonas repeated, because the sentence offended him. Like a sponge that has less emptiness, the text said, trying for plain language and hitting poetry by accident. If I didn't know better, I'd say the wood is compacting internally without losing volume. The vitrines mount bolts, Helena added, as if she needed a second exhibit. We set torque to spec when we first placed the coffin. After last night's events, 2 were measurably looser. The glass creaked when the temperature cycled at dawn. It never creaked before. Kareem leaned forward. A ledger that becomes a brick, he said softly. Each entry is not just a number. It is a weight. Elisa's laptop chimed with the rote politeness of software. She ignored it. We're past debating whether the box eats physics, she said. The question is what it wants as its endpoint. She turned the screen so the room owned it. A graph rose in steps, not smooth, each increment a stair that had learned how to be an ankle. 2 lines. City tally, public, in gray. Box tally, observed, in black. Gray lagged, black led. Both rushed toward a red horizontal ruled with the theater of dread. 9.99. I ran models, Elise said, voice flat, as if boredom might rub the superstition off. Baseline mortality with festival effects gives us an expected climb of 21 over the next 7 days. The festival itself, traffic density, intoxication, fireworks, water, creates a 2.7x spike in accidental deaths citywide. Historically. Add the box's corrections. Unreported suicides, neonatal losses filed off the record, quiet overdoses, and our black line intersects the red somewhere between Saturday night and Sunday dawn. That's if we have an average festival. If we add any mass casualty, the black line goes vertical before Saturday ends. Vertical how much? Keller asked from the doorway. He'd slid in on quiet shoes and crude coffee. Like people write street memorials vertical? Like glass breaks, mounts sheer vertical, Helena said. She swallowed. We were not building this room for 1,000 souls. Kareem drew a sheet from his folder. A high-resolution photo of a papyrus, its fibers a foxed yellow, the glyphs drawn with the impatience of a scribe who could not afford to be perfect. He set beside it a typed transliteration, not glossy journal style, but the ugly honesty of field notation. From a late third intermediate fragment in a secondary cache near our shaft, he said. I didn't date it when we found it because I was angry at my funding. I am a smaller man than my profession deserves. He tapped a line with his finger. This phrase does not appear in the funerary corpus as I know it. Asterisk, when the scales break, the city pays. Asterisk, it's not canonical liturgy. It reads like a municipal proverb elevated to theology. He traced another line. Here, asterisk, against the feather the heart, against the grain the mouth. Asterisk, that word you liked, grain, is ambiguous. Could be bread, wheat, abundance, or it could be tally marks. Scribes called their hashings grain because they bit the papyrus like scythes through a field. So the coffin is not a tomb, Jonas said, feeling the center of the thought like a gear catching. It's a machine for audit, an instrument of Ma'at scaled to the polis, Kareem said. Not for the dead's judgment, for the living's. A city tells itself stories to smooth its ledgers. This object refuses the smoothing. It refuses mercy, Elise said, before she could soften the word. Mercy is a code in my software that changes a column header. The box doesn't read my headers. Jonas walked the perimeter of the room because moving made him less likely to raise his voice. He pointed to the black line rushing toward 999. What happens at the red? He asked. What does a threshold mean to an object that eats density? Kareem shrugged, palm up, an honest gesture he had borrowed from men who dig. A climax, a closure, a release. If it is an audit, it has a balance point. If stories hold, 9 repeats because it is a theater of completion. Helena didn't look at the graph. She looked at the glass beyond the conference room, where visitors flowed in curated channels. And if we hit the red, she said, we crack the vitrine, we crack the mount, we crack the cedar. Do we open it? Do we build a bigger glass and pretend this never happened? Do we call it art and sell tickets? We put it in a vault, Keller said. Because police pragmatism gropes for basements. Bolt the vault shut. Drown it in concrete. Put a freight scale on top, just to torture ourselves. The box counted a domiciled death in Bern because a tablet whispered jurisdiction, Elise said. Your concrete has Wi-Fi. We will not outsmart the part of our world that loves to confess to itself. Jonas felt something like a headache behind his sternum. He looked at the two-seater shavings again. The same wood, a shade heavier because the city had insisted on statistics. More itself. He put his palm on the table beside the bags and said, half to the room, half to the version of himself who still liked causality. I will not let a number become a prophecy. Then argue with the festival committee, Helena said. They sent me a memo this morning saying the pyrotechnics vendor has a new sponsor and would like to increase the final volley by 30%. They want a bigger ending, Keller said, and then, to his credit, shut up. Elise pulled a second chart. I ran alternative curves, she said. If the city imposed temporary speed restrictions, closed 2 dangerous intersections, increased patrols at 3 known accident sites, added barriers along the limmat where drunk people like to pretend to be saints, she pushed the chart forward. We shave 2 to 4 off the Saturday spike. Margins are small. Margins might be exactly where we live. That's my job, Jonas said. I can do that. The chief will scream about manpower and money. He'll sign if I use the right nouns. Use liability, Elise said. Mouths that won't accept death often accept lawsuit. Kareem lifted his hands in a helpless gesture that somehow contained a blessing. Even if you win the humanoid parts, he said, the box will count what you don't see. Hidden crimes, quiet exits. Then we drag them into view, Jonas said, surprising himself with the vehemence. We audit the auditors. We pull every file that smells like mercy and make it honest by noon. If the box is ahead by 5, we make Zurich admit 5. Elisa's eyes flicked. She understood the appetite under the plan because it was hers with a badge on. I'll accelerate amendments, she said. But we should be clear. Agreeing with the box does not reduce its number. It only makes our gray line look less foolish. Sometimes less foolish is an achievement, Helena said. The door opened on a courier who didn't dare step over the line of the room's air. He handed Helena a padded envelope. She opened it with the fingernail of a person who would always prefer blades. Inside, a small resin plug, brittle as dried scab. A note, from the crate pallet seams. Dislodged this morning. Asterisk asterisk, the conservator had scrawled bitumen plus salt trace in pencil as if afraid to wake the word. Kareem took the plug with a scholar's greed. He sniffed it, of course he did. Bitumen, he said. Sea salt? Not from Luxor. The lid's odor last night. Did you smell? The sea, Helena said. I thought I was inventing memories I don't have. A ledger for a city should taste of the trade that made it possible, Kareem murmured. All cities that count themselves do it because ships came and left. Salt is accounting you can touch. Jonas looked around the table and felt himself enrolled against his will in a ceremony that had no priest and perfect minutes. He tapped the 999 line. If we reach this, we brace for failure, physical, mechanical, social, he said. We evacuate before it cracks. We put the coffin where it cannot injure a school group. We manage the crowd so the city doesn't supply the last dozen souls for the math. And if reaching it does not break glass, but something else, Helena said, not as a challenge but as a readiness. Then we revise our hats, Jonas said dryly, and we try to keep the lights on. His phone vibrated with the city's weather disguised as texts. The chief's ellipses, a counselor's urgent pretending to be modest, a festival organizer's CFO signature block aggressive with sponsors. Elisa's model moved 1 pixel closer to red with the kind of serenity that looks like malice. Jonas gathered the papers he hated needing. He looked at the cedar shavings one last time, the way the later one seemed in his stupid human brain to weigh more even in a baggie. He pocketed the papyrus transliteration. He pressed his hand against the conference room glass and looked out at the atrium where 2 schoolchildren were trying to take a selfie with a sphinx that would never admit permission. He told himself he was not superstitious. He told himself he was practical enough to buy time. City braces, he said, and the phrase sounded like orders even if nobody had signed them. We do the ugly things that save lives. We rewrite signage and traffic flow. We issue boring statements that make lawyers purr. We triple guards and put the vitrine under a cage no donor will forgive. He opened the door to the atrium. The museum's climate spilled around him, the chemical breath of a building built to preserve the past against the present. Beyond the plaza, he could hear carpenters beginning to raise stages for the festival, the rhythmic thump of a city rehearsing joy. He thought of thresholds and fireworks and the color of crowds seen from above. On his way out, the freight scale chirped from the conservation bay, no change, only a system checking itself. Still, the sound made the glass case creak faintly, as if the wood inside had grown a gram of certainty. Outside, banners unfurled across streets. The city inhaled. The box waited. Zurich dressed itself for joy with the focus of a military exercise. Banners ran like veins across Bahnhofstrasse. Food stalls erected their temporary geographies along the limmat, and stages sprouted in squares where statues usually argued with pigeons. Jonas signed the last of his memos: temporary speed limits, extra barriers along the river, extra patrols at intersections where history liked to repeat, and walked the route with Keller until the route became a diagram he could see with his eyes closed. Crowd flow looks good, Keller said, which meant no obvious traps except the humankind. We've got med tents at 3 points, EMS on bikes. Fireworks delayed until the chief's ulcers calmed down. Ulcers don't count, Jonas said. They don't add grams. At noon, a city councilor in a bright scarf shook his hand for the press and said the thing councilors say when numbers are abstract. We trust our institutions. Jonas wondered if you could trust a box. Helena called from the museum. We've installed a secondary cage over the vitrine, she said. It looks like a zoo enclosure. The donors will sue me later. For now, I prefer their lawsuits to their obituaries. Good, Jonas said. Elise, I have a live mirror on the freight scale, Elise said, her face in a small secure window on his phone. I'll type less today, fewer lags. We'll move amendments after the weekend. My team knows to call me if anything smells wrong. Everything smells wrong, Jonas said. Kareem arrived with a paper bag that turned out to be dates. For salt, he said, handing one to Helena, who closed her eyes at the taste like a ritual she wasn't ready to admit to. Today is for remembering we are animals. By late afternoon, the city had a heartbeat you could hear in your chest. Brass bands practiced optimism. Children dragged adults toward sugared air. Jonas stationed himself at a command post with line of sight to the river and a second line to the museum. Keller moved like a rumor through the crowd. The sun lowered, flattening the river into a road of hammered metal. At 1842, the first siren, small, tidy. A sprained ankle, a feint. Nothing that taught the day new words. At 1913, a bike collided with a stroller. Both cried, neither died. At 2002, a text from Elise. Black line at 892. Festival curve according to plan. Asterisk asterisk, he hated that according to plan could apply to mortality. At 2017, the call that changes a city's temperature without changing the air. Anonymous, male, vowel sounds flattened by fear or affectation. There is a device near Central, under the stage. He hung up before the operator could sort his consonants. Jonas's radio filled with overlapping nouns. He split them by habit, sent Keller to Central with bomb squad, rerouted foot traffic away from the stage, cut the amplification so the crowd would lower without knowing who asked them. People follow their noise. Remove it and their bodies lose a destination. For a minute, he had hope that the choreography would hold. Didn't. The rumor moved faster than speakers. Someone shouted bomb, and a wave ran through bodies like a thought through an animal. Waves aren't bad until they meet a narrowing, bridge railings, food stalls, the geometry that turns movement into pressure. Corner by the bridge. Street with scaffolding. A child lifted to air that didn't exist. From the command post, Jonas saw the turn begin, the tightening, the wrong angle of shoulders, the helpless physics of crush. He went to shout and discovered he had no verbs that could stop weight. He watched Keller's silhouette on the central stage raising both hands, a priest for the god of stay calm. The god did not attend. In 12 seconds, the first person fell. In 20, the people behind them didn't have a choice about stepping where they didn't want to. In 60, human bodies had become the worst kind of math, load-bearing. The stampede's noise wasn't screaming. It was a low, continuous engine of breath hammered flat, punctuated by the clatter of metal like instruments dropped. Somewhere fireworks technicians argued with radios about delays. Somewhere a girl whose jacket was too warm tried to find her sister's hand and found no hand, only the color of a sleeve. Jonas's radio spat numbers that refused to settle. 2 down. Make that 5. We need spreaders at the scaffolding. Please, please. The last word was no one's job and everyone's. At 2021, Keller's voice confirmed casualties. 11 by count at triage stations. We're still pulling. He didn't say yet. He didn't have to. Jonas's phone chimed in the pocket he had forgotten. Elise, entering pronouncements as they come. 3 dots. The box, the second message, stopped mid-sentence. The freight scales feed, in a split window at the command post, shuddered. A blur of digits became a number that shouldn't have been able to climb that quickly without breaking the pixels. Plus 726, 000G. 1 pulse. No stair steps. A vertical line in a world that likes curves. Helena, Jonas said, already moving toward the car. Already promising himself he wasn't abandoning the square but triaging the apocalypse. What do you see? A crack, she said. Her voice had no weather, just coordinates. The secondary cage took the first hit. The vitrine flexed. I heard, listen. She held her phone to the audio feed. The museum's microphones picked up the picnic of terror, the creak of tempered glass learning a new vocabulary, the deep animal groan of wood under stress. And under it, where breath had been before, the hum of many voices, as if a crowd on the other side of a wall were practicing names. Not chanting, not synchronized, just reciting privately together. Evacuate the museum, Jonas said. We began before you said it, Helena said. The donors are finally useful. They move when told to. He hit lights and didn't hit siren. Sirens pull eyes. He needed the night to fail to notice him. As he turned onto the museum street, he saw the flicker you only see in older buildings. The lights oscillating through their ballast, not a blackout, a shiver. Inside, the gallery was a funnel of alarms. The secondary cage around the vitrine had bowed inward, the bars too honest to lie about force. The glass itself held, running with delicate, spiraled stress lines like frost at the edges of a window. The lid had shifted, not open like an invitation, a fraction, a seam that wasn't a seam yesterday. Through it the smell walked out, a dark perfume of bitumen and something bleak and mineral, like salt pulled from a deep place. The sea in a building that pretended to have no coast. Helena stood with 2 guards and a conservator whose lips were moving through a prayer he had forgotten years ago. The vibration sensor's graph had escaped its y-axis. The thermal camera registered blue eating blue until the palette needed new colors to explain the absence. 11 dead, Jonas said, because numerals like to be told where to sit. That should be, he stopped. The freight scale had registered the plus 726 kilograms and then, obscenely, kept climbing small digits after the surge, like someone counting coins after counting bars of gold. Plus 726, 004G. Plus 726,021G. Plus 726,035G. That's beyond the casualties, Helena said softly, as if the object punished loud voices. We've only got 11 confirmed. Elisa's face lit his phone again, City Hall fluorescent behind her. I'm seeing pre-checks ripple, she said. Hospitals triaging. Some of those will live. Some won't. But the box doesn't wait. It's adding at a rate that... She stopped, closed her eyes. We just got a correction on last week's overdose. Family decided to sign the line. It added 8 hours late and 3 minutes early. The box is catching debts while the city is screaming. In the gallery, the hum of voices from inside the coffin resolved into something worse. Not individual names, but syllables that could be alphabetical order. A registry being read aloud by someone who doesn't have a mouth. Kareem stood behind Jonas before Jonas had time to be annoyed he was there. His fingers clutched his canvas notebook like a life vest. "This is the harvest part," Kareem said. "Not theatrically, not happily. In the story, there is always a harvest. The city's breath has been taken in. Now something exhales." "Stop doing that," Jonas said. "Which part?" Kareem asked, as if he could stop being himself. "The part where conversation makes us weaker." Jonas turned to Helena. "We need to bring the cage down. If the glass fails, I don't want shards in any human throat. Clear the wing. Now." She was already moving. Doors sealed. The museum systems knew how to scold and deny. They did both. In the space left, the coffin seemed larger, as if geometry were not as conservative as it had promised to be. Keller burst through the security door, smelling like the river and decision. "Central is a triage field," he said. "We've got the last of the trapped out." Bomb Squad found a backpack with water bottles and a bad sense of humor. No device. Panic did the work. Jonas pointed at the freight display. "Panic continues to do the work," he said. The numbers still climbed in small, respectful steps after the giant leap. Plus 726, 112G. Plus 726, 140G. The vibration registered periodic peaks, regular like a mechanical action learning a rhythm. The lid seam, call it what it was. The opening, glinted as stress worked like ants along glass. Helena handed Jonas a face shield, and he didn't make a joke about fashion. He stepped to the edge of the cage while the conservator loosened the fast clamps that would let it drop if the glass surrendered. "On my word," Jonas said. "If you see microfractures run, you drop. You do not ask." The conservator nodded and wiped his palms on a rag without noticing the gesture. The audio turned from hum to whisper again, closer to language without surrendering to it. Elise, listening through a feed, said, "It's not demotic." She swiped to another window. "The cadence is the registrar's roll call. I know the rhythm. It's the way we read back entries when we audit. Not names, identifiers. Numbers." "Numbers," Keller echoed, and for once the words sounded like a curse. The freight scale's digits stuttered. The graph on Elise's screen overshot the model, black line leaping across the red 999, not with triumph but with indifference to theater. Alarms in the conservation bay agreed with nothing except themselves. A hairline in the vitrine described a new path, neat as a signature. "Drop," Jonas said. The cage came down with a clanging humility, bar to floor, a second wall within the first. The glass didn't fail. It decided to live 1 minute longer. The seam in the lid widened the width of a fingernail, then stopped. Through it, the smell of salt thickened until it carried something else. A metallic tang like coins in a mouth. Voices rose, no louder, just more. As if more of the city had found a way to speak in the same small room. Elise whispered into the channel because the room had convinced everyone to be small. "We're at 967 by public, 974 by reconciled, 986 by the box." Keller rubbed his forehead with the heel of his hand. "We're not going to make it to fireworks," he said. "We were never going to make it to fireworks," Helena said, and glanced at Jonas, who had no practice at prayer and didn't start now. The number ticked. Plus 726, 201G. Plus 726,210G. The thermal camera recorded a blue that had run out of adjectives. The vibration sensor sang a hard line and then fell silent, as if some oscillation had passed into a mode the sensor couldn't call movement anymore. In the seam, darkness, not an interior you could light with a torch, not a cavity. Thickness, the visible edge of weight. "Evacuate the entire building," Jonas said. Louder now because orders need air. "Full pull. Staff, visitors, everyone. We will not be the headline." Helena keyed the system that made the museum behave like a submarine. Shutters. Routes. A kind voice over the PA lying about plumbing while the guards told the truth with their hands. People moved. They always do when architecture tells them how. Jonas turned to Elise's tiny window. Cut your system's visibility to the outside hospitals, he said. Delay pre-checks if you can. Slow the handshakes. I can't, she said, and the words were apology and defiance both. They'll route around us. Machines love truth more than chain of command. Then call the council, Jonas said. Tell them to stop the festival. Now. They won't, Keller said. Sponsors. Then tell them the police are taking the stage, Jonas said. Now. He looked back at the coffin, at the bar cage around the glass around the wood that was no longer wood the way it had been yesterday. He felt, with a physical clarity that had nothing to do with belief, that if he lifted the lid he would not find a void or a body. He would find pressure. He would find the city's breath compacted into something that could teach him the density of names. The freight scale chimed, and for a second, only a second, the digits hesitated between units, as if the machine sought a bigger word than kilograms. The room's lights flickered again. The seam held. The voices receded to a murmur 1 decibel lower than thought. Hold the line, Jonas said, to people, to glass, to numbers. Hold. He didn't finish. The freight scale climbed again with no corresponding pronouncement, no siren, no call, beyond deaths reported, beyond anyone's ability to attribute. The weight rose as if the ledger had found a back room full of unpaid totals and decided to settle them all at once. Jonas shouted the evacuation order. Feet answered. Alarms gave them rhythm. Behind him, the lid shifted the width of a breath, and the smell of salt became weather. The museum emptied the way a lung empties, fast at first, then in stubborn pockets. Guards shepherded stragglers past vitrines that stared back with practiced indifference. Outside, the plaza's banners tried to pretend the air hadn't changed. Inside, the Egyptian gallery narrowed to a single fact. The coffin under glass, the secondary cage bowed inward, the seam along the lid a thin black sentence that refused to end. On Jonas's phone, Elisa's graph had dropped theatrics and gone to the cold logic of numbers leaping. 992 by public, she said, voice tinny through the PA-strained Wi-Fi. 998 by reconciled. The box is at 1012. How, Keller began. Amendments, Elise said. Quiet corrections pushed by night shift supervisors. Old deaths folding into the right columns. A stillbirth from months ago stamped today because someone finally found the courage. The box is taking them as soon as the systems admit they exist. And some, she stopped, and when she spoke again, the clerk had to borrow breath from the woman. Some aren't in any column yet. I can feel them in the way the network hiccups. It's reading our hesitation. The freight scale's digits climbed with a composure that made rage feel childish. Plus 726, 312G. Plus 726,369G. Plus 726,401G. Each step small, unarguable, cumulative, like taxes. The vibration sensor plateaued. The thermal camera had settled into a uniform bruise. The instruments had reached their own limit for adjectives. Helena stood with her hand on the cage's quick release, knuckles bloodless. How much can this glass take? Keller asked a conservator whose job had never included triage for metaphysics. Another millimeter of flex, he said, and then added, because honesty had caught him. Or it could spider in an instant and cut us to ribbons. Kareem pressed his palms to the bars, eyes on the seam. He looked like a man at the rail of a ship reading whether he had only ever seen on maps. His voice came from a place lower than his lungs. It's past counting, he said. This is pronouncement. Pronouncement of what? Jonas snapped, angrier at his own pulse than the archaeologist's tone. Balance, Kareem said simply. Not fair in the way we want. Fair in the way a lever is. The hum inside the coffin. Names reduced to their registry rhythm. Thickened. The seam widened the width of a thumbnail, then a little more and stopped, a miser with a purse string. Along the lid's carved register, bitumen ran in hair-thin threads that gathered at hieroglyphic cuts and glistened like resin that had decided to be blood. The smell of salt grew teeth, a metallic tang that put coins under tongues. Jonas tasted it and thought, absurdly, of the limmat carrying confetti and plastic cups downriver, of how cities salt their joy with what they can't afford to say aloud. Elisa's window shook. "We've exceeded all modeled curves," she said. "The box is 43 over any count I can produce. That's," she swallowed, "that's more than the hidden stillbirths and quiet suicides and recoded overdoses. Disbalancing old debts. Years. Things we called open cases because justice pending sounded cleaner than gone." Keller stared at the digits as if they were a suspect who refused to blink. "It's paying out interest," he said, and for once the metaphor wasn't glib. "Is there any way to sever it from the city?" Helena asked Elise. "Kill the handshakes. Darken the building. Go analog." "I can isolate my terminal," Elise said. "I can pull cables and break rules and make IT hate me for a decade. It won't matter. The hospitals talk to insurance. Insurance talks to civil registries. Civil registries mirror to backups. The box has learned to listen at the deepest wall." She paused. "And Jonas, listen. The pre-check feed just registered you." "Me," he said, the word stupid in his mouth. "Not as a death," she said quickly. "As a scheduled proof of life, the annual health insurance ping your HR runs every summer." The box pulsed and then settled. "Noticed your heartbeat in paperwork." He looked up, startled enough to forget the numbers. In the glass, his reflection looked back. Pale, jaw set, eyes adapting to a room that no longer wanted to be a room. For an instant, no longer. His reflected face wore a geometry that belonged to masks and thresholds. The long, smooth slope of a jackal's snout overlaying his features, 2 points of red not in the room but implied by it. The illusion vanished when he moved, which did not make it less convincing. "Seeing things," Keller said from somewhere to his left, brittle bravado holding. "Common symptom." "Common," Jonas repeated, and made a note in his head he would never write down. The scale chimed. Plus 726, 999 G. Plus 727,000 G. The museum breathed in the way buildings do when air pressure changes. A hairline raced across one corner of the vitrine, then paused as if considering options. The conservator's lips formed a word that could have been now or no. Helena lifted her chin, ready to drop the cage, and checked Jonas's face. "Wait," he said. "If the glass fails, the shards will do the counting for it." He pointed to the shroud of mylar blankets and fire-retardant canvas they had stacked during the last hour's triage. "Cover the cage interior. If it goes, it dies against cloth, not skin." They worked fast, blanketing the bars with a drape that turned the enclosure into a soft cell. The seam leaked salt air until the drape's edges fluttered. The hum inside synchronized briefly, no, not synchronized, aligned, then dissolved into individual murmurs again, a choir that refused harmony because harmony is a lie. The freight digits leapt an insult of 4 kilograms with no corresponding note from the city. Elise swore, a clean, precise word that had survived her job. "That's not me. That's not any cue I can see." "Old interest," Keller said again, quieter. "Backlog," Kareem said, and tucked his canvas notebook under his arm like a child. "A city's shadow accounting." The seam edged wider and something happened that none of the instruments could annotate. Pressure moved through the room like weather made personal. Jonas felt his shirt pressed to his spine, his gums ache. The bitumen filament along the carved Anubis head broke and traced a line downward, red-brown and obscene against the cedar. "Enough," Helena said, no longer curator, not yet priest. "We're past data. We're at harm." She met Jonas's eyes. "Say it. Clear," he said. "Everyone but skeleton crew. If this opens, I want as few witnesses as possible." "You think not seeing changes it," Keller muttered, but he obeyed. He didn't want the story in him either. Kareem didn't move. He had gone gray the way some men do at altitude. "You asked what happens at the red," he said softly. "The stories say, the lid opens and the city sees its heart. Nobody wants that. Hearts don't look like what poets say. They look like meat." "We're not a story," Jonas said. "We're a building with failing glass." Kareem swayed. The room tightened toward him as if to catch a dropped object before it shattered. He sank to one knee as if genuflecting. His face stayed up, eyes frosted with a distance that rarely visits men awake. "It will not close until it weighs us all," he said, the sentence arriving without tremor, without theater, as if he were reading a line off a ledger he had always carried in his pocket. He blinked, focused, tried on a smile that had no opinions left, and collapsed sideways, boneless. Helena and Jonas were there at the same time, one with museum first aid, the other with cop hands. Pulse, present, thin. Breath, present, ragged. They laid him on the mylar, the squares of it reflecting the gallery lights like a broken lake. Vasovagal, Keller said on automatic, as if naming the body's tricks might soothe them. Or hunger, or the part of him that believes finally met the part that can't. Kareem's eyelids fluttered. Don't destroy it, he said to the air, or to the jackal, or to Jonas. If you break the shell, you release the count. We're not breaking anything, Helena said, but the sentence had to fight with the way her gaze lingered on the stress spider in the glass. Elisa's voice thinned. 998 by public. 999 by reconciled. The box. She exhaled so audibly the mic clipped. 1023. It's past your line in the sand. Jonas stood. Something reckless and embarrassingly human rose in him. The urge to put both hands on the lid and push it shut by will. He held his arms still through function. He keyed his radio to the chief, to the bomb squad repurposed as crowd control in the square, to EMS. Museum emergency remains contained, he said, because words matter to dispatch. We are not a casualty site. You will be, the chief said, lived experience rasping out of a throat that had seen too many nights like this end badly. If glass lets go. I have blankets in, Jonas said. I need authorization to move the object. To where? The chief asked, not because he didn't know the answer, but because saying vault out loud makes it real. Basement vault, Helena said, before Jonas could. It's rated to survive a fire in a building older than the idea of code. The freight elevator's load is... She checked a laminated card because even now she loved procedure. More than enough. Moving it during surge is risk, the chief said. Not moving it is also risk. Pick your liability. Liability is paperwork, Elise whispered into the line, and Jonas almost laughed because despair has a sense of humor. Do what won't kill people in front of cameras. The freight scale chirped, then paused. For the first time in hours, the digits didn't climb. They held as if waiting for an instruction. Jonas recognized the feeling because he had lived it at doorways and on rooftops and in rooms with guns. The moment a decision is possible and therefore unbearable. He looked at Helena. She nodded once, an economical gesture that respected time. He looked at Keller, who spread his hands in a your call that wasn't laziness this time, only trust. He looked at Kareem, who had propped himself on one elbow with the mulishness of a scholar who refuses to miss class. Do it, Jonas said. We move it. The team moved with the choreography of terrified competence. Straps rechecked, pallet skids oriented, elevator keyed and jammed in maintenance mode so no one else could call it. The mylar drape stayed over the cage. The cage stayed over the vitrine. The vitrine stayed a hair from failure. The crane motor hummed. The coffin lifted that first insulting centimeter in which every tendon of physics considers betrayal, then rose. In the seam, something like wind pressed, then withdrew. The hum inside grew the smallest fraction, as if a room on the other side had become aware of new walls. Elise narrated numbers like a metronome trying to keep a reluctant orchestra honest. 1023, 24, 25. They crossed the threshold into the freight corridor and the building's geometry changed from temple to ship. Concrete, pipes, the honest guts that keep climate where it belongs. The freight elevator's doors folded back like reluctant lips. The pallet rolled on. Helena stood in the car with the coffin as if keeping appointment with a god. Jonas, Keller, the conservator, two guards wedged ourselves around the load like a human gasket. Basement, Helena said. Vault level. The doors closed. The car began to descend. Between the white-painted floors, the sound changed. No longer hum and whisper, but a lower, older pressure, the way deep water speaks to hull. The seam in the lid showed nothing. That was somehow worse. In the reflection of the brushed steel, Jonas saw his face again, and behind it, for the length of one breath, the hint of a long dark muzzle where his own features should be. When he turned his head, the muzzle vanished. When he looked back, so did he. At level B, the doors opened to a corridor with rolled steel doors and the kind of humidity a museum calls arid. Helena keyed 3 locks and said the code to the 4th out loud. Bureaucracy as incantation. The vault's door retracted with the fatigued grace of a machine that had expected today to be about Roman coins. Inside, a concrete floor with a recessed pad for a scale they almost never used. Jonas had ordered it delivered 2 hours ago. It glowed a sullen 0. They set the pallet down. The blankets remained. The cage remained. The glass held. Elisa's voice, traveling through concrete and will, reached them. 1029, she said. It won't close. Security posture? The chief asked, voice flattened by distance. We going to keep feeding it? We're going to stop letting it feed on us in public, Jonas said. We lock it down. We stop weighing. We stop mirroring. We remove its stage. Keller leaned close enough to the cage for his breath to fog the mylar in a small, quickly obliterated oval. If we stop weighing, he murmured. Does it stop counting, or do we just stop knowing? We stop knowing, Elise said promptly. Knowing was the sin. Counting is the compulsion. Jonas stared at the blankets until they were all he could see. He imagined, unhelpfully, what lay under them. Cedar dark as old blood, cartouches that had learned to weep, a lid seam that would reopen if given room, the density of a city in slow collapse. He imagined lifting the glass, tipping the coffin, smashing the thing until would remember trees. He imagined what might come out if he did. Don't, Kareem whispered, not because Jonas had moved, but because he read the thought with a professional's cruelty. If you break it, you release the ledger into a form you cannot trap. Jonas's radio crackled with the chief's caution and the council's cowardice and the city's inexplicable appetite for finishing a party. He closed his eyes once, opened them, and chose the least bad sentence he had. Seal the vault, he said. Helena hit the button. The steel door rolled on its track with a sound like a sigh dragged over gravel. As the gap narrowed, the hum inside the coffin lowered a half step, as if the pitch of the room had changed key, and then, just before the door met the jamb, the freight scale display ticked +2, 300G for no reason anyone would ever find. The door seated, bolts slid, air equalized. They stood in the corridor, 5 people and a ledger without a mouth, and listened to a city upstairs remember how to be loud. For a long moment, no one spoke. Keller broke it. So, he said, do we tell the press it's over? No, Jonas said. We tell them nothing. We count internally and lie in public until we have a different verb. Helena looked at him, surprised and then not. We can't hold that line forever, she said. We only need to hold it until morning, Jonas said, and it wasn't a plan so much as the thinnest kind of hope. Then we pick a better lie. Behind the steel, the scale's digits, mirrored to a handheld they'd forgotten to mute, twitched once. Plus 0.001 kg. It could have been noise, could have been a breath. It could have been the city keeping score in a room that had run out of adjectives. In the stairwell, a sergeant asked whether to requisition demolitions. Keller said yes, Helena said no, Jonas said not yet. They stood with a decision that could either bury a problem or teach it how to walk. Upstairs, fireworks that should have been canceled blossomed on a sky that didn't care. Downstairs, the vault held. For now. They sealed the vault like a promise no one could afford to keep. Paperwork moved first. An emergency order drafted in language that pretended steel could swear. Then the door. Rolled steel folding along its track with the gravity of an altar. Bolts driving home until the corridor's air flattened. Signs blossomed on cinder block. Hazard symbols, a custodian's lie about asbestos. A rectangle of tape that meant don't more eloquently than policy ever had. Upstairs, the city tried to resume the face it had chosen this morning. The festival committee issued a statement that called the stampede a tragic miscommunication. Sponsors tweeted condolences written by interns. Counselors praised first responders with a rhythm that never found contrition. Fireworks trailed late, out of order, as if the heavens had been forced to read from a script and kept losing their line. The official narrative came together with the tidy speed that makes truth look clumsy. Containment incident at the Antiquities Institute. Artifact destroyed. A press officer chose destroyed because the word satisfied both fear and donors. Decisive, terminal, easy to put in the past. Cameras were led to the empty glass in the darkened gallery. Captions did the rest. The public inhaled and pronounced itself fine. Jonas signed his name where names go when they are there to carry weight. He sent Keller home. He sent Helena to a conference room with a blanket and a lock. He sent the guards to the perimeter where their presence could be understood. Kareem slept in a chair in the staff kitchen, a nap his body converted into penance. Elise remained at her desk because desks are where clerks suffer nobly. She said she would leave when the printer finished a report. It did not. The vault's corridor held its patient hum. Concrete remembers pressure. Jonas stood with the door at his back and felt, through soles and bones, a kind of attention gathering on the far side, less a sound than a contour. The new scale on the vault floor sat in his peripheral vision like a dog waiting for its name. The display showed zeros the way a held breath shows composure. "Go home," he told himself, and practiced the responsible sentences. "You did what you could. You moved it where it can't hurt people. You're a detective, not a priest." Each sentence fit, none of them closed. He went to the stairwell. The building exhaled the particular fatigue of night shift air. Cleaner, flatter, untrustworthy. On the street, cleanup crews hoisted fences onto trucks. The river shouldered foil and paper with the patience of water that has suffered human joy before. Jonas watched a man cross the bridge alone, a balloon bumping dumbly against his knuckles. He listened to the dull metronome of someone's bass in a window, the municipal pulse of a tram, the notch click of the city's breath figuring out how to be counted again. His phone buzzed. From City Registrar. No preamble. Elise did not do preamble when the hour had stripped everything else. A single line. "When can you talk privately?" He typed now, and she sent no reply. 10 minutes later, she stood at the bottom of the museum's service stairs. Hair caught back, cardigan holding shape like a rule. She carried a backpack with nothing in it that would help. "Walk," she said, and they did, along the corridor to the vault, where the signs tried to bluff them away from their jobs. "Tell me you've slept," he said. "Tell me you have," she said, which was how clerks do affection. She took a folded paper from her bag. Not a printout, a letter. Elise wrote important things in ink when she suspected the future might prefer paper. He didn't read it. He watched her face. It had no storm, only a weather map's honesty. "I waited again," she said quietly. "I know we agreed not to, that the scale should be blind, that we should starve whatever exchange it's making with us. I know." "Why?" Jonas asked, because it was the only correct question left between professionals who didn't have the luxury of judgment. "Because after we locked the door," she said. "The mirror feed I forgot to kill flickered. The display in my office twitched the way it does when a server wakes. I waited an hour. Did it again. The number didn't rise. It noticed me noticing." She breathed, inventorying what she was about to confess. "So I came. I told no one. I used a key your chief will pretend never existed. I checked the seal on the vault. Untouched. I turned the scale on. I made a note with a pen like a coward from the 19th century. Then I raised the gate the minimum to roll the pallet 2 centimeters onto the pad." "You opened the vault," he said, plain so she wouldn't have to carry euphemism. "I opened the door enough for measurement and less than for trespass," she said. "The blanket stayed. The cage stayed. The glass held. There was no sound. The smell—" She touched her throat as if something had brushed it from inside. "Salt. The old metal of coins. I read the number. I turned the scale off. I left." "How much?" Jonas said, already knowing the shape of the answer the way a body knows cold. She held his eyes because looking down would have been a kind of betrayal. "Exactly your body weight," she said. "To the gram." He didn't move. The corridor's light learned the wrong color. Something in him, the clerk, the skeptic, the man whose job is to put nouns where they belong, sat down. He pictured the annual medical form HR made him fill, the nurse reading out loud a number he pretended to forget. He imagined the box making notice of him the way a ledger flags an account. Pending. He was here. Every part of him that believed in causality rebelled. The part that believed in systems took notes. "I'm alive," he said. A stupidity he needed to hear out loud. "Yes," Elise said. "The ledger already marked you." "You're sure?" he asked, because the only fair thing left to ask was a cruelty. "I checked our database," she said. "No entry with your name, no pre-check, no hospital admission, no nothing. There is no administrative path by which the box should be allowed to notice you. Still, it did. I know your weight from your police medical. I know the scales calibration. I know the number I saw." He wanted to laugh. He thought of Keller's flippant proof of life ping, how a system had greeted his continuing existence with a handshake. He wanted to break the scale with his hands the way a man wants to smash a mirror that has said something too accurate. He imagined the city upstairs breathing while a ledger in the dark noted his account and moved its bead. "Thank you," he said at last, "because gratitude is the last law when the others fail. You should not have done it. I am glad you did." She nodded once, the physical minimum for care. "I wrote it down for you," she said, holding out the letter. "If you burn it, make me a liar and do it quickly." He didn't take it. Not yet. He let it be a weight she could relinquish in her time. He pointed toward the vault instead. "Come," he said. "If we're going to commit a sin against our own orders, we can at least write its name together." They stood at the steel and listened the way people at sea learn to listen for pressure through hull. The scale display on the wall, slaved wire only to the pad inside, showed zeros because the pad had been cut from its mirror. The camera in the ceiling, old, ugly, analog, showed a picture of blankets under dirty glass. It meant to reassure. Cameras rarely do. He took the letter from her and slid it into his inside pocket. The gesture felt like agreeing to be part of something he had already refused without success. "We tell no one else," he said. "Not yet. The city doesn't get this story. It already has too many." She almost smiled. "You're going to lie in public," she said. "I am going to put one lie in front of a larger one," he said. "It's what law does when mercy and panic try to marry." They left the corridor. He walked her up to the lobby, where a lone guard, bored beyond religion, pretended the museum had stopped being a heart. On the steps, the city held still for a second, lull between trams, a pause in the river's surface when a barge's wake finishes speaking. Elise touched his sleeve like a citizen touches the statue of a saint when no one is watching. "If it starts climbing fast again," she said, "you call me." "If it starts climbing at all," he said, "I will call you. You'll already know." She left. He watched her cross the plaza with the purposeful economy of a clerk who has spent life walking the shortest line between two unlovely points. He waited until she turned a corner and took the letter from his pocket. He didn't open it. He knew what it said. Elisa's notes were always cleaner than everyone's and kinder than they looked. He put it back and went to his car and started an engine that ignored metaphysics and did its job by exploding small vapors in a line. At home, he didn't turn on lights. He leaned his back to the door and considered the architecture of sleep. He pictured the coffin in the vault. Blankets, cage, glass, seam, pressure. He pictured the scale reading his weight in his absence, a number written for a body still walking. He walked to his kitchen and drank water until the glass felt like inventory. He took off his shoes and sat on the floor and put his hand over his sternum, an old habit from a childhood that had not promised this job or this city. In the morning, the headlines did their carnival. He skimmed them with a detective's contempt and a citizen's resignation. Tram panic leaves 11 dead. Museum scare contained. Council praises coordination. He dressed and went back to work, because work at least keeps the story marching. Helena met him with the brittle courtesy of a person who had spent the dark defending everything she loved against accountancy. Keller made a joke about ghosts filing paperwork and stopped halfway through it when he saw Jonas's face. Kareem sat at the foot of a stair with his notebook and a cup of coffee he hadn't managed to drink. He looked older by a width you could weigh. "Destroy it," Keller said. stage whispering when he had no stage, and tell the world we saved their children from a curse. We don't get to destroy what we can't describe, Helena said. We only get to warehouse it better. Jonas nodded because the sentence was a kind of liturgy now. He went downstairs to the vault. The steel door felt heavier, as if weight could learn door hinges the way it had learned cedar. He didn't open it. He watched the camera feed. Blankets, glass, strips of mylar taped cleanly by a conservator who could not abide slapdash even at the end of the world. The scale display, wired to the pad only by copper that refused to be magic, showed 0.000 kilograms until his eyes ached. He waited. He could do that. He had spent years waiting for suspects to sigh. He stood with the patient posture of a man who knows that dread is simply attention without permission. For a long minute, nothing. Then a twitch. Not a number, analog. The needle on the auxiliary dial they had installed because an old technician refused to trust digital. The needle hiccuped the width of breath and then held. The camera caught a tiny quiver along the mylar's edge as if a current had moved through a room with no source. Jonas exhaled one careful length and wrote nothing down. The inbox on his phone filled with meetings. The city resumed its ledger with the primness of a clerk sweeping pencil shavings into a palm. Somewhere above him, a school bus door folded and unfolded with the irritated dignity of an artifact that had never wanted to be part of a city at all. He touched the steel lightly with his fingertips and left no mark. He did not speak to the door. He had learned that when an object insists on language, the best answer is sometimes a refusal. By night, the museum would have a new sign. The donors would begin to grieve in public by commissioning relief dinners. The council would ask for drafts that said nothing and permitted everything. He would write what they needed and keep the letter in his pocket. On the walk back to daylight, he passed a window where tourists took photos of a sphinx that had never answered a single question asked in good faith. He thought of Elise at her monitor, Helena at her glass, Keller with his jokes, Kareem with his unkillable metaphors. He thought of a city that had learned to lie in order to love, and of a box that refused to lie and therefore could not love at all. On the steps, he paused. The river moved with ordinary water. People moved with ordinary intention. The sky had remembered how to be a sky. He put his hands in his pockets and felt paper and his own pulse. Somewhere in the building beneath him, behind a door made of will and procedure, a scale needle twitched though no one stood near it. Somewhere in a database across town, a clerk entered a death and a machine honored it. Somewhere in a ledger without a mouth, his name sat waiting to be true. He went to work anyway. The city's breath requires clerks and liars and a few honest enemies. He could be all three until the ledger disagreed. The narration you are hearing, the one that tells you what happened and what we prefer to have happened, closes here, not because the thing is finished, but because our verbs have run out and the object does not need them. Some ledgers close only when the city itself stops breathing. When a city tries to hide its debts, something or someone always comes to collect. Zurich may have sealed its vault, but you and I both know that silence is only another form of waiting. Thank you for staying with me through Weight of the Dead. If you felt the chill of the ledger, if you caught yourself checking the shadows of your own city, then the story has already done its work. For more journeys into mysteries where evidence and dread keep equal company, subscribe to Somnolent Conspiracies. Ring the bell so you won't miss what surfaces next, and leave us a note below. I read them all, even when the hour is late. Until then, sleep lightly, keep your balances honest, and remember, some ledgers are still open.